Chapter 3568. Alice hurriedly said, "Gong Jie, calm down." "How can I calm down?" Gong Jie retorted angrily. "If you tell me that because my sister didn't acknowledge him because of this matter, you hid you by your side as a punishment, that's simply unreasonable. Things aren't what you think." Alice also stood up and said agitatedly, "There's no punishment or targeting. It's just that." Gong Jie stared at her. "Alice, you've never been a mother before. You don't know what the pain of losing a child means." Alice stared at Gong Jie with her mouth agape. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her heart. She clenched her fists and suddenly said self-deprecatingly, "I'm afraid I won't have the chance to be a mother in this lifetime. However, that doesn't mean that I can't understand how it feels to be a mother." Gong Jie was also stunned. He knew that his unintentional words had hurt her. Alice was infertile. Before she came to Hurricane, she was an ordinary doctor. In order to research a vaccine, she did not hesitate to use herself as an experimental subject. She did not expect that the experiment would fail and the virus would backfire. She was infected with the virus and was finally out of danger after a few days and nights of emergency treatment. Because of this, she was expelled from the hospital. Because of the virus, she was infertile for the rest of her life. This almost became a thorn in her heart. "I'm sorry. It's okay. It has nothing to do with you." She must have thought of the fact that she was infertile. Gong Jie did not mean that in his words. Gong Jie sighed. "Forget it. Since you don't want to say it, then forget it." He was about to leave when Alice suddenly spoke. "I'm curious. How did you suspect that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu?" Gong Jie paused in his steps and turned around with a smile. Direct and accurate. Combining the clues, Gong Fan's identity was indeed very suspicious. Alice said, "Sit." Hearing this, Gong Jie did not say much and just sat down on a chair. Just as he sat down, Alice suddenly asked curiously, "Don't you suspect that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu? Why didn't he go back and look for you guys?" "I still can't explain this matter to this day. Could it be amnesia?" Alice smiled and picked up the goblet. She drank the wine in the goblet in one gulp and finally decided to be frank. Perhaps, it was the man's words that had finally touched her. The pain of losing a child. As a woman herself, she could not bear to see her flesh and blood being separated from her. Alice said, You didn't lose her memory." Hearing this, Gong Jie raised his head abruptly and glared at her. "So, you admit that Gong Fan is Yun Tianyu?" "Yes." Alice nodded frankly. "Gong Jie, you're so smart. You already have the answer in your heart. You ask me because you trust me. After so many years of friendship, I can't let you down." Gong Jie did not know whether to be happy or worried when he heard this. He was happy that Yu was still alive. What Alice said must be true. No matter what, it was a blessing in disguise that he was still alive. However, he was worried that Yu had become like this, which made him extremely heartbroken. Just the fact that he had accepted the name, Gong Fan, was puzzling. He has already forgotten about you. Chapter 3569. What? Gong Jie widened his eyes in disbelief. That's impossible. It's fine if he forgot about me, but how could he forget about his beloved mommy? Could it be that his brain? There's nothing wrong with his brain. The so-called memory loss is not what you think it is. Alice's expression was calm, but there was a hint of guilt in her eyes. Gong Jie did not say anything. He looked at her, waiting for her to tell him everything. Alice took a deep breath and said honestly, "I hypnotized him." Hypnotized? Do you know about deep hypnosis? Gong Jie was so shocked that he was speechless. He suddenly remembered that when a person wanted to leave the Hurricane group, they would use deep hypnosis to erase all memories related to the Hurricane group. On one hand, this was to protect the interests of the Hurricane group. On the other hand, the memories related to the Hurricane group were too dark. If the person wanted to leave the group and return to a normal life, these memories would be a burden. Hence, deep hypnosis could erase a lot of memories. Such hypnosis had always been carried out secretly by Alice. Gong Jie had always known about hypnosis, but he did not know that the person who carried it out was Alice. "So, you hypnotized him?" "Yes." "How did you hypnotize him?" Gong Jie asked agitatedly. "Can the erased memories come back?" Yes, but it's very difficult. Not only were Yu Yu's memories erased, but his first personality also disappeared. Personality? You didn't know that Yu Yu has two personalities? I didn't know. Alice explained. He has two personalities. One is the most innocent side, like a piece of white paper, spotless. The other is the dark side, evil, like a demon. Gong Jie was stunned. So, you erased his first personality and he became like this? You can say that. Alice analyzed Yu Yu's personality for Gong Jie. Yu Yu's childhood was spent in happiness and darkness. The happiness was that even though he grew up in a single-parent family, Xianxia gave him a lot of love and companionship. However, the darkness was that Yun Na and Li Qin's insults and scoldings gave birth to the hatred in his heart. The two personalities existed independently and did not interfere with each other. Back then, when Yu Yu dealt with Yun Na and Li Qin, the first personality did not know about it. He only vaguely knew that he seemed to have done something earth-shattering. One was innocent, the other. One was an angel. The other was a demon. Back then, when she sealed Yu Yu's memories, her first personality was also destroyed by her second personality along with the memories. The memories but the personality. Even if the memories were recovered, the first personality would not come back. After Yu Yu became Gong Fan, he was completely dark. He was ruthless, black-bellied, and would do anything to achieve his goals. However, Xianxia was still the white moonlight in his heart. However, even Xianxia would not be able to awaken his first personality. There was no such thing as reviving a destroyed personality. Chapter 3570. You should be apologetic. If I didn't mention this matter, how long were you planning to hide it from me? Alice said weakly. This was your father's request. As his subordinate, I had no choice but to carry it out and keep it a secret. Now that I've told you this secret, I've already broken the rules. Gong Jie clenched his fists and trembled in anger. Why did he do that? He really could not understand. What was the meaning of Gong Xiaoying doing this? He intends to use Yu Yu to deal with Xianghu. Deal with Xianghu. Gong Jie's eyes were filled with shock. He knew that his father hated Mu Yaja to the core, but he did not expect him to be so cruel as to use an innocent child to deal with Xianghu. When the time comes, when Yu Yu deals with Xianghu, he'll use this as a threat to make Xianxia return to the Gong family. Doesn't he think that he's being cruel? Jie, Alice said calmly. Do you think that with your father's status, he's in a high position and no one has ever dared to go against his words? In his mind, there are no rules about right or wrong. In his mind, he doesn't care who's right or wrong. No one can stop him from getting what he wants. He loves Yu Yu, but in his mind, he doesn't think that it's a mistake for his grandson to return to the Gong family. However, if he doesn't use this method, he won't be able to keep anyone. Whether it's Xianxia or Yun Tianyu, he feels lonely, but other than power, he has no other means to get his daughter back. When love reached the depths, in a certain aspect, this love would change its form and flavor. Gong Xiaoying was wrong, but Alice understood. Gong Xiaoying was hateful, but he was also pitiful. Yu Yu is the most pitiful one, Gong Jie said. He didn't have any choice and had his memory cruelly erased by you. Do you know who is the most important person in his life? Alice didn't make a sound. His mother. Gong Jie continued. He regarded Xianxia as more important than his own life. Erasing his memory is even more cruel than killing him. Alice was so shocked that she almost suffocated. Indeed, ever since Yu Yu's memory was erased, he had become a completely different person. He was a true devil. If Xianxia saw this, she would be very sad. Gong Jie didn't even know how to mention it to him. I want to see him. Gong Jie suddenly said. Let me see him. You can't see him. Your father protected him very well because he was worried that you would bring him back. Still, even without Gong Xiaoying's interference, the current Yu Yu may not be willing to leave with you if you want to take him away. Gong Jie smiled. I know. Then. So if I borrow you, maybe you can see him. Alice was stunned. She immediately understood what Gong Jie was referring to. I've been investigating your recent whereabouts. You disappear for a period of time in the middle of every month. I'm guessing that you must have gone to the island during this period. Alice did not say a word. Gong Jie held her hand tightly. Bring me to him. Alice. Chapter 3571. She looked up and said calmly, "Okay, I'll take you there. However, you need to be prepared. At least when you board the ship, you can't reveal that you're the crown prince of the Gong family." There were still more than 10 days until the middle of the month. Gong Jie and Mu Yaja had a video call over the ocean. When Gong Jie found out about this, he said that he had confirmed that Mu Yaja was Yu Yu and that Alice would bring him to see him in the middle of the month. Mu Yaja expressed that he wanted to go too. Gong Jie laughed. "Brother-in-law, don't joke around. You're the most dangerous person in Hurricane. You can't even get on the ship." Mu Yaja raised his eyebrows. "Okay, it's fine if I don't go. However, if Xianxia goes, it shouldn't be a problem." Gong Jie immediately understood what Mu Yaja meant. He frowned and thought about it carefully. "I understand your plan. Okay, then I'll send Xianxia to your place 3 days in advance." "Okay." After ending the video call, Mu Yaja stood up from the desk. After hesitating for a long time, he finally decided to mention this matter to Xianxia. Xianxia was reading a script in the bedroom. Mu Yaja pushed the door open, gently knocked on the door, and walked into the room. When she heard the sound, she looked up. When she saw him walking in with a serious expression, she became very nervous. "What happened?" Mu Yaja sat on the side of the bed silently. He crossed his legs elegantly and said in a deep voice, "There's something I want to tell you. However, you have to stay calm. Don't be nervous and don't get agitated, okay?" Xianxia laughed. "Why are you so serious? What's the matter?" "Don't worry, I won't get agitated." Mu Yaja smiled and stroked her hair gently. "Yu Yu." Just the name that escaped from his thin lips made her face turn ghastly pale. Ever since Yu Yu went missing, this name had become an unspeakable pain in her heart. At the mention of this name, Xiaxia's heart ached. "Why, did you mention him? Yu Yu is not dead yet." Xianxia couldn't react for a moment. It was only after she had a hard time separating the 5 words from each other and repeatedly comprehending them that she was stunned and suffocated. He's not dead?" Xianxia immediately sat up and stared at Mu Yaja in disbelief. "Is this true? Don't lie to me." It wasn't easy for her to pull herself out of despair. Now, she couldn't take a second blow. Mu Yaja's lips curled into a smile. "Do you think I'll joke about this? Xiao Jie was the one who told me that Yu Yu is not dead." "He's not dead. Then where is he?" "At the Gong residence." Xiaxia's expression froze at once. "He was hidden by your father. He changed his name and disappeared without a trace." It's impossible." Xianxia smiled weakly. "Could you be mistaken? Yu Yu is at the Gong residence, but it's been so long. Why hasn't he returned home? He was hypnotized and lost all his memories. He even forgot his own name." Mu Yaja continued, "He also forgot about you, forgot about me, forgot about Xianxia, forgot about Yao." Xianxia gasped and shook her head in disbelief. "I don't believe it. How could he have lost his memories?" This was something that only appeared in movies, but it actually happened to her. It was unbelievable. Chapter 3572. Listen. Sure. I'm just letting you know about this, but you have to stay calm. Don't think too much. Leave this to me. I can handle it. "But," Mu Yaja held her shoulders and asked seriously, "do you trust me?" Xianxia looked into his eyes and was silent for a long time. Then she suddenly said, "Of course. You're my husband. How can I not trust you?" She hugged him tightly. She didn't know whether to be happy or worried about this news. Her eyes were a little red. She was happy that Yu Yu was still alive. As long as he was still alive, it was a blessing in disguise. However, she was worried that she didn't know when Yu Yu would be able to come home. Xianxia walked into the baby's room. Yao was lying in the crib, fast asleep. There was a small night light above the crib. It was soft but not glaring. It shone on Yao's tender little face, which was as tender as white jade. Yao would be 2 years old in a few months' time. She wondered if Yu Yu would be able to come home on that day. Xianxia looked at Yao's neck. There was a necklace around her neck. It was made by Xianxia. During the accident, Xiao Chen had been holding tightly onto the 2 purple crystals that Yu had given him. He made 2 necklaces. One was for himself, and the other was for Yao's neck as a memento. After Yu's accident, Xiao Chen had matured overnight. He had transformed from his childish self into a mature big brother. Xiao Chen dreamed of Yu. Yu said to him, "When I'm not around, you have to take good care of Mommy and Yao." He had always engraved these words in his heart. Xiao Chen believed that Yu was definitely still alive. The telepathy between the Gemini twins told him that Yu wasn't dead, but he didn't know where he was. However, his ability was limited. He didn't know how to search, but he never gave up. Xianxia smiled. "Yao, I remember that the first word you learned to say was brother. You really want Yu to come back, don't you?" Yao's eyes were tightly shut, but her pink lips were slightly curled up. She was clearly having a sweet dream. Xiao Chen stood at the door but did not enter. Instead, he quietly leaned against the door and looked at his mother, who was squatting by the crib and talking to Yao with a gentle expression. He smiled. Mu Yaja had already told him about this. When he found out that Yu was still alive, he was both surprised and not surprised at the same time. His daddy said that Gong Jie would bring him to see Yu in the middle of the next month. At the same time, he also gave him a very important task. Gong Jie would think of a way to bring Yu back. Xiao Chen would stay on the island as Gong Fan, and replace Gong Fan for the time being. Xiao Chen gladly agreed. Even if he was trapped on the island, he still had a way to come back. However, he was more worried. If Yu was brought back, would he be able to regain his memory? Xiao Chen wasn't sure about Yu's current situation. He also didn't know if his so-called memory loss could be recovered. He only hoped that his uncle would bring Yu back to the Mu family. At least, Xianxia could wake him up and help him regain his memory. "Mommy!" Xiao Chen called her softly. Xianxia turned around and saw him standing at the door. She immediately wiped the tears from the corners of her eyes. "You're not asleep yet?" "Yes, I was passing by and saw that the door was open." Chapter 3573. In the middle of every month, Gong Fan would return to Ashland Island with Lisa. The medication that Alice had concocted could only last for about 30 days. She had to renew the medication every month. His sleep condition was very bad. He had insomnia, many dreams, and nightmares. His mental strength was also very weak. If not for the special sleeping pills that Alice had concocted, it would be very difficult for him to fall asleep peacefully. Other than that, his body also needed regular checkups. He returned to Ashland Island before the middle of the month. Just as he returned to the island, Lisa received a call from Alice. Alice said that she would arrive at the island early the next morning. Lisa could not help but feel a little suspicious. Originally, Alice would arrive on the 15th of every month. Tomorrow was the 12th. What was going on? Alice explained that there was a new batch of medication that had been improved and would replace the previous batch. Lisa no longer doubted him after hearing that. Before this, Xiao Chen had already disguised himself and sneaked onto the ship that was heading to Ashland Island. It would take an entire night to reach Ashland Island from the hurricane headquarters. Alice's makeup skills were top-notch. She applied makeup on Gong Jie and Xiao Chen and easily fooled them. After all, with Alice's face, she would not be put in a difficult position. She lied and said that Gong Jie and Xiao Chen were her assistants. Gong Jie was still all right. He used a wig to replace his original silver hair. This made it very difficult for people to recognize him. Xiao Chen, on the other hand, was much more aggrieved. He was not considered short for his age. He was about 1.5 meters tall, which was already considered very tall. However, it was still difficult for him to disguise himself as an adult man. Hence, Alice put on a woman's wig for him. He wore a white lab coat and put on some rouge. He was already very good-looking and had the unique aura of a young man. After a little makeup, he really looked like a young woman. After spending a night on the ship, Alice instructed him to do some things. First, if there were no accidents, Xiao Chen would have to stay on Ashland Island for a month. She would think of a way to cover for him to leave the island the next month. Gong Jie was a little worried. He was not worried that Xiao Chen's identity would be exposed. It was just that there would be no one else on the island for a month. Other than the maids, there would not even be a playmate. Given Xiao Yichen's personality, would he be too lonely? Little Yichen, on the other hand, did not mind. Even though he might have to be separated from his parents and sister for a month, he was willing to do it in exchange for Yu Yu's return, even if he had to pay a heavier price than this. The ship docked at the harbor. Lisa stood at the harbor to welcome them. However, when she saw Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen behind Alice, her eyes suddenly flashed fiercely. She frowned slightly, obviously sensing that something was amiss. After a moment of surprise, she did not show any suspicion. She only said in a cold tone, "Alice, you're here." In the hurricane headquarters, there was no distinction of seniority. Hence, Lisa had always called Alice by her name. Alice smiled at her. "Is he awake?" "Yes, he's awake. He's reading in the study," Lisa said. Her tone was calm and emotionless, like an emotionless machine. Xiao Yichen could not help but look at her again. Chapter 3574. However, Xiao Yichen could only lament and didn't reveal his emotions. He followed closely behind Alice, lowered his head, and quietly walked into the castle. Would he be able to see Yu Yu soon? Xiao Yichen suddenly felt extremely excited. When he thought of this, he couldn't help but feel uneasy. He didn't know how Yu Yu had changed after not seeing Yu Yu for more than a year. Had he grown taller? Was he still as skinny as before? Would he recognize him when they met? Xiao Yichen clenched his fists tightly, only to feel his palms full of cold sweat. The castle was huge. As Lisa led them all the way, Xiao Yichen only felt that there were endless stairs and endless corridors. Finally, after walking for a very long time, Lisa stopped in front of a door and said in a deep voice, "Young master is in his room. You can go in directly." Alice pushed open the door and walked in naturally. Gong Jie followed closely behind. Just as Xiao Yichen was about to step in, he inexplicably felt Lisa's gaze on him, as if she was secretly examining him. He followed her gaze and sized her up, only to see that she was coldly sizing him up. That gaze, which seemed to be able to see through his entire body, made Xiao Yichen's heart jolt violently. He had an inexplicable suspicion that Lisa might have recognized him. Lisa quickly turned her gaze away and looked out the window, as if the gaze she gave him just now was just a casual glance. Xiao Yichen didn't take it to heart. He entered the room and locked the door from the inside. Alice walked into the bedroom and saw the back of a young man lying quietly on the big bed. He lay quietly on the bed with his eyes closed, as if he was still asleep. However, Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen, who were standing behind her, couldn't calm down. Especially when he saw the young man's extremely familiar yet pale face. Gong Jie's breathing suddenly became erratic. He walked excitedly to the bed and squatted beside it until he recognized that the child in front of him was really Yu Yu. Yu Yu, who had disappeared without a trace for more than a year, suddenly felt a burning sensation in his chest. It really was Yu Yu. Xiao Yichen was so excited that his entire body trembled. This voice had only appeared in his dreams for more than a year. Now that he finally saw it in real life, he couldn't even tell if this was reality or a dream. Gong Jie couldn't help but reach out and cup Yu Yu's little face. However, the moment he touched his face, the young man on the bed suddenly woke up. He suddenly opened his cold eyes, and his pupils contracted. When he recognized the unfamiliar man in front of him, he sat up in shock and coldly swatted his hand away. There was a loud smack. He swatted Gong Jie's hand away expressionlessly and asked coldly, "Who are you?" Gong Jie was about to step forward when Alice immediately stopped him. She said to Yu Yu, "Young master, these two are the assistants I brought over. He was taking your temperature just now." The young man frowned but didn't say anything. He only glanced at Gong Jie and Xiao Yichen cautiously. Xiao Yichen saw Yu Yu's cold and indifferent gaze land on him. He scrutinized him for a long time before he finally looked away coldly. It was obvious that he didn't pay much attention to him. At the same time, this also meant that Yu Yu had really forgotten about him. Perhaps he didn't feel anything when he was asleep, but when he woke up, Xiao Yichen suddenly realized that Yu Yu had really changed. He had become especially unfamiliar. Chapter 3575. Alice pretended to be normal as she walked over. As usual, she started a series of tests on him, including measuring his blood pressure and temperature. Yu Yu was very obedient. He allowed her to use all sorts of instruments to measure his body. However, his expression was indifferent, as if it was just a routine. Seeing that he was so calm, Alice couldn't help but ask, "Do you still have palpitations recently?" "Occasionally." He was a man of few words. If he could describe something with one word, he would definitely be stingy. He didn't speak often. Probably, other than him, no one else could live on this isolated island for a few months without breaking down. Humans were social animals. They were used to living in groups and isolated from society. Yu only had Lisa by his side. However, both of them were quiet and didn't speak often. Occasionally, Lisa would deliberately talk to him, but Yu would only use a few words to end the conversation. In the past, Yu was naturally introverted. However, because of Xianxia, he was still considered cheerful. However, under hypnosis, the second personality destroyed the first personality. As a result, the second personality completely took over. Today, Yu was more like a walking corpse. Xianxia's heart ached so much that he was about to suffocate. When he thought about how lonely Yu had been for the past year, he felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart. For some reason, he hated Gong Xiaoying even more. Gong Jie pulled Xianxia behind him and reminded him, "Are you ready? Can you hold on for a month?" Xianxia nodded and said firmly, "Uncle, don't worry. It's only a month. I can still hold on." Gong Jie said coldly, "I'm just afraid that when the time comes, you won't be able to think about Mommy and Yueyao until you cry and snot." Xianxia pouted. "Can't I think about them even if I can't see them?" Alice glanced at them and suddenly took out a medicine box. She took out a syringe, opened a medicine bottle, and sucked the medicine into the syringe. According to the plan, she injected Yu with tranquilizers and sleeping pills in place of the original injection. Then, she disguised him as Xianxia and took him away without anyone knowing. Then, he asked Xianxia to stay behind to replace Yu. There were not many people on the island who were close to Yu, so normally, no one would notice. Even Lisa could not tell the difference between Xianxia and Yu. Alice held Yu's arm. Just as she was about to inject him, Yu caught a glimpse of the medicine bottle and was shocked to see the table of elements on the bottle. He immediately pushed her needle away. The syringe fell to the ground with a loud thud, and a few drops of medicine spilled out. Alice stared in shock. Yu asked coldly, "What medicine is this?" "This is the medicine that I've been injecting you with before." Yu narrowed his eyes and said mockingly, "The table of elements on the medicine bottle is not what it used to be." He was very observant. In the past, whenever Alice injected him with medicine, he would observe the table of elements on the medicine bottle. Now, the medicine that Alice was about to inject was obviously not the same medicine as before. Moreover, she had brought 2 suspicious people with her this time. In an instant, he became even more vigilant. Yu suddenly opened his mouth and was about to ask Lisa to come in when Gong Jie rushed over and covered his mouth tightly. He warned, "Don't make a sound." Chapter 3576. Yu sized him up coldly. He struggled fiercely, trying to break free from Gong Yicheng's grip. Gong Jie saw that he was struggling fiercely, so he used his hand like a knife and slashed the back of his neck. Yu's eyelids fluttered, and he fainted on the bed. Alice was dumbfounded. Xianxia was so shocked that he couldn't close his mouth. He ran to the bed and carried Yu. He opened his eyelids and saw that he had really fainted. He was shocked. "Uncle, you're so cruel. You're so cruel to your own nephew." Gong Jie held his forehead and said with a headache, I didn't do it on purpose. I didn't use too much strength. He won't die. He's just fainted." "If you used more strength, Yu's neck would have been broken, okay?" Xianxia said angrily. Gong Jie was as strong as 3 adults, and he still had the cheek to say that he didn't use too much strength. If he used more strength, he would have killed him. Gong Jie cleared his throat awkwardly and said, "It's good that you hit him. Maybe he'll remember who he is." He looked at Alice for confirmation, but she said coldly, "No matter how much you hit him, he won't regain his memory." Gong Jie's lips twitched. Although his heart ached, there was nothing he could do. "I'm worried that he'll spread the news." "Okay, don't make a fuss." When he was young, he often got injured during training. He didn't suffer any injuries that were more serious than this. Xianxia carefully touched the back of Yu's neck. Seeing that there weren't any injuries or fractures, he was relieved. Yu had fainted. This time, He could finally do whatever he wanted. Little Chen hugged him tightly as if he had found his lost treasure. His eyes reddened uncontrollably. You. Xiao Chen's heart was filled with tenderness when he finally met her after so many times in his dreams. No matter what, he had to bring Yu home. He never belonged to Hurricane. He belonged to the Mu family. He had a father, a mother, a brother, and a sister who loved him. He shouldn't be Gong Fan. He shouldn't be such a cold-blooded, demon-like war machine. Alice walked over and helped Yu lie flat on the bed. She helped him dress up, then took off Yu's clothes for Xiao Chen to change into, while Xiao Chen put on Yu's clothes. After more than a year, Yu had also developed a little and grown taller. However, compared to Xiao Chen, he was still very skinny. The clothes on his body looked very empty. After putting the wig on his head, the job was finally done. Xiao Chen, on the other hand, disguised himself as Gong Fan and lay on the bed. Based on his appearance alone, no one would be able to tell that he was a fake. Gong Jie frowned and said with disdain, "Can't you act more realistically?" "How?" "Make your expression cold and your gaze fierce." Xiao Chen immediately put on a straight face. However, Gong Jie was used to seeing his warm smile. Now that he suddenly imitated Yu's expression and put on a cold face, Gong Jie couldn't get used to it. Alice said, "There aren't many people on this island, so you don't have to force yourself. However, you can't give yourself away when you're facing Lisa. She's in charge of taking care of Yu for Gong Xiaoying. If you give yourself away, it'll be hard for the news to leak. When that happens, it'll be very difficult." Chapter 3577. Xiao Chen and Yu had been swapped. The swapped Yu was immediately taken away by Gong Jie. When they left, Gong Jie carried him on his back. Lisa stood at the door and saw Gong Jie carrying Yu. The guy on his shoulder had obviously fainted. She asked symbolically, "What's wrong with him?" "Blood sickness." He had fainted. Lisa didn't probe further with such a careless explanation. She obviously didn't suspect anything either. As an assistant, how could he faint from blood sickness for no reason? That didn't make sense. She let him go easily. Gong Jie couldn't help but feel that something was amiss. He turned around and looked deeply at Alice, only to see her enter the room with a cold expression and close the door. He had a feeling that she knew about this matter. Gong Jie asked Alice, "Have you communicated with Lisa about this?" "No. But I have a feeling that she knows." Gong Jie lowered his voice and said, "I swapped Yu." Alice furrowed her brows and turned around to take a look. However, she didn't have time to think too much about it. "Now's not the time to think about this. Let's get out of here quickly." Gong Jie nodded. After Gong Jie and Alice left with Yu, Lisa entered the room. Xiao Chen was initially at a loss. When he saw her enter, he frowned and pretended to be asleep on the bed. He wanted to bluff his way out of this. Lisa walked to the bedside and saw Xiao Chen lying on the bed quietly asleep. She smirked mockingly and kicked him. Xiao Chen sat up in shock and said angrily, "Why did you kick me?" "They're gone. You don't have to pretend anymore." "Pretend?" Xiao Chen's heart skipped a beat, but he refused to admit it. "What do you mean pretend? I don't know what you're talking about." "You can understand." Lisa paused and said, "Mu Chen." When Xiao Chen heard this, he abruptly turned his head and stared intently at her. He couldn't believe that Lisa could recognize him so easily. After all, he and Yu looked exactly the same. At first, even Mu Yaja couldn't tell them apart. Only Yun Shirshir could recognize them at first glance. How could Lisa tell at a glance that he wasn't Yu? She could even tell that he was pretending to be asleep. What a sharp gaze. Lisa pursed her lips coldly, apparently knowing what he was thinking. She said coldly, "I recognized you the moment you got off the boat." Usually, Alice would only come alone. She was not allowed to bring anyone with her. However, today, two strangers had appeared. Even though Gong Jie and Xiao Chen were in disguise and no one could recognize them, it didn't mean that she wasn't observant. She used to be Gong Jie's maid, so how could she not recognize him? Xiao Chen had the same face as Yu, so how could she not recognize him? No matter how he disguised himself, it was difficult to change his facial features. She knew very well that they were here to take Yu away. However, she turned a blind eye and did not stop them. With her ability, she was fully capable of stopping them. However, she didn't. Xianxia's heart skipped a beat. He was so nervous that he broke out in a cold sweat. He was worried that Lisa would ignore Yu if she knew about this. Lisa smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'll just pretend that I don't know about this. From now on, you're Gong Fan. As long as you play your role well and don't let anyone recognize you, I won't make things difficult for you." Chapter 3578. Why did she do that? Her job was to protect Yu, but in reality, she was a spy that Gong Xiaoying had placed around him to keep an eye on him. This was her job, but she didn't fulfill it. She even let Yu go on purpose. Why did she do that? There's no reason. Lisa couldn't be bothered to explain further. "I'm guessing that Alice will report to Gong Xiaoying that you're unwell. You don't have to go anywhere except here. You just have to stay here quietly. Remember, don't talk too much." After she finished speaking, she turned around and left the room swiftly. Xianxia leaned against the headboard in a daze. For a moment, his mind was in a mess. When Yu woke up, he was in a high-class cabin. He sat up and realized that he was on a huge bed. Just as he sat up, he heard a man's elegant voice beside him. "You're finally awake?" Before Yu could react, Gong Jie pounced on him. He hugged his head and rubbed his face. "Yu, Uncle missed you so much." Yu frowned and instinctively reached out to push him away. "So disgusting. So mushy." Yu said coldly, "Let go of me." However, Gong Jie didn't let go of him. Instead, he cupped his face and planted a kiss on his cheek. "Get lost." Yu instinctively pushed his face away and distanced himself from him. Immediately, he reached out and rubbed the spot where Gong Jie had kissed him. His eyes were filled with disgust. Who was this man? He actually kissed him. Yu looked up angrily and glared at Gong Jie. "What are you doing?" "Kissing my biological nephew." "Biological nephew?" Yu narrowed his eyes dangerously and asked suspiciously, "Who are you?" Gong Jie said pitifully, Yu, don't tell me you don't even recognize your biological uncle?" "I'm your uncle, Gong Jie." "Gong Jie?" Yu coldly spat out 3 words. "I don't know you." He wiped the spot where Gong Jie had kissed him. Then, he rubbed his hand on the bedsheet forcefully. Gong Jie was traumatized when he saw this. You think I'm dirty?" "Yes. It's dirty," he admitted bluntly in a cold-blooded tone. Gong Jie was speechless. Gong Jie. He really wanted to beat him. In the past, he had never felt that this fellow deserved a beating. Gong Jie inched closer to him and asked angrily, "You really don't recognize me? Should I know you?" You Gong Jie pursed his lips and comforted him. "It's okay if you don't recognize me. Anyway, it's good that you're still alive. Your mommy knows you're still alive. She's waiting for you at home." Mommy. This word actually caused a slight ripple to appear in his ice-cold heart. Even though he quickly regained his deathly stillness, only this word caused him to become slightly absent-minded. In an unfamiliar environment, he was surprisingly calm. He asked, "Where are you taking me?" Although the Gong Jie sitting in front of him had an overbearing aura, Yu's aura was not suppressed at all. Such a thin body seemed to be brewing an extraordinary aura. It was frightening. He had really changed. Chapter 3579. Looking out of the window, Yu saw the sea. He knew that he was now traveling on the sea, which was no different from a cage on the sea. It was difficult for him to escape, and he was destined to be unable to escape from this man's control. Since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. Yu lay down on the bed quietly and said coldly, "You don't have to watch over me. I can't escape anyway." Gong Jie widened his eyes in surprise. He was surprised by his calmness. However, he quickly smiled and stood up. "Have a good rest today. You'll go home tomorrow." He left the room after he finished speaking. After the door was closed, Yu closed his eyes and fell asleep. At the same time, in the Mu residence, Xianxia was restless. She tossed and turned in bed when she returned to her room. She could not sleep well and felt uneasy. Gong Jie sent her a message saying that he was on his way back with Yu and asked her not to worry. However, she was nervous, agitated, and uneasy. She was worried about Yu, but she was even more worried about Xianxia. Would he be lonely on the island alone? Initially, she did not agree to this plan no matter what. Yu Yu was back, but what about Xiao Yichen? Was he going to replace Yu Yu and stay on the island forever? She heard that there was nothing on the island except for a huge castle. It was almost isolated from the rest of the world. Wouldn't Xiao Yichen feel lonely? Xianxia's heart ached when she imagined Xiao Yichen being left alone on the island. However, she also felt that it was unfair to Xiao Yichen. She also felt that Wuxia was heartless. However, Xiao Yichen said that he was only going to replace Yu Yu temporarily. It did not mean that he would never return. The most important thing now was to bring Yu Yu back and recover his memory as soon as possible. After that, everything would be easier. If Yu Yu continued to stay on the island, nothing would go smoothly in the future. Xianxia reluctantly agreed. Before Xiao Yichen left, Xianxia hugged him to sleep for the entire night. Xiao Yichen hugged her tightly because he was going to be away for a long time. He did not know when he would be back, so it was inevitable that he would miss her. Xiao Yichen did not dare to stay any longer, and he left hurriedly as he was afraid that it would make her sad. Now that Yu Yu was already on his way back, she felt inexplicably uneasy. 2 days later, the ship docked. Wuxia and Xianxia were waiting at the port in advance. When Jianghu carried Yu Yu off the ship, Xianxia saw them from afar. She and Wuxia went up to them excitedly. Before they even got close, tears rolled down their cheeks. Yu Yu looked at the tall and handsome man in the crowd. Her gaze was fixed on him, but she looked away coldly. However, when his gaze fell on Xianxia and he saw her red eyes looking at him with anticipation, he did not know why his heart started to beat erratically. Yu Yu was inexplicably stunned by his strange reaction. Xianxia walked up to him and held his face. She looked left and right. When she saw that it was really him, she still could not believe it. She wondered if she was dreaming. It wasn't until she caressed his face that she confirmed that this wasn't a dream. Chapter 3580. Yu Yu frowned and said coldly, "You've got the wrong person." Xianxia's expression froze. Wuxia also frowned slightly and exchanged glances with Jianghu. Jianghu immediately said, "He doesn't remember anything. His memories have been sealed by hypnosis." Yu Yu pursed his lips mockingly and looked away impatiently. To him, the so-called memory loss that Jianghu mentioned was ridiculous. Memory loss? How could he have lost his memory? Who were these people, and why were they saying such strange things? In fact, it could only prove that Alice's hypnosis was too successful. The fake memories that she had created had already infiltrated Yu Yu's mind. The memories that she had fabricated made Yu Yu really believe that he had grown up in the Gong family and that he was Gong Fan and not Yu Yu. Hence to him, what Jianghu had said was a complete lie. He would not fall for it so easily. Xianxia was at a loss. The child standing in front of her had the same face as Yu Yu. Whether it was his exquisite eyes or his handsome features, they were all so familiar. In the past year, he had not appeared in her dreams countless times, but he was out of her reach. However, now that the living Yu Yu had really returned, he was so unfamiliar. The Yu Yu who used to pester her and call her dearest mommy seemed like he would never return. Xianxia's heart was filled with disappointment. She was extremely upset as tears fell one after another onto his shoulders. She was heartbroken. Yu Yu saw her tears and felt annoyed. He turned his face away and did not look at her. To him, whether it was Xianxia, Jianghu or Wuxia, they were all complete strangers. It did not matter. Xianxia said with difficulty, "Yu Yu, do you really not recognize me?" "I've said it before." Yu Yu finally could not take it anymore. He waved her hand away and said coldly, "I've said it before. I'm not Yu Yu. You've got the wrong person. Don't call me that again." These words were undoubtedly heart-wrenching. Xianxia's heart ached as if it was being cut by a knife. She clenched her fists and held back her tears. At the side, Wuxia held her shoulders tightly and comforted her. "Don't rush. Take it slow." "Okay," Xianxia asked carefully. "Yu Yu." Yu Yu looked at her coldly and did not say anything, as if he was looking at a stranger. However, Xianxia did not back away. Instead, she reached out and hugged him. His body was cold. His skin was cold as if he was born like this. His palms were cold, not as warm as Xiao Yichen's. Xianxia hugged him tightly. Even though Yu had become so cold when she saw him again, she was already very glad that he was still alive. It was good that he was alive. She had thought that he would never come back. She was already very grateful that her most precious family member had been found after losing him. In the car ride back, Xianxia hugged Yu. Even though he was obviously resisting, she refused to let go and hugged him tighter and tighter. His body was so cold. She wanted to use her body temperature to warm him up. However, Yu was extremely uncomfortable. Seeing that he could not break free, he stopped struggling and looked out of the window without looking at her. His cold gaze made her heart palpitate. Chapter 3581. It was the third day since Yu left. Xianxia spent the past 3 days on the island in agony. The nutritious meals, oatmeal, fruits, and all sorts of green vegetables, were all boiled once and tasteless. There was broccoli in every meal, and his eyes were about to turn green from eating. Xianxia felt like he was about to turn into a rabbit. Every time he sat at the dining table, he felt like he was being tortured. He ate the tasteless vegetables and felt like a rabbit who had nothing left to live for, gnawing on the broccoli resentfully. The problem was that there were so many vegetables, but where was the meat? There was no meat at all. It was no wonder that Yu had become so thin after disappearing for more than a year. God, how could he not be thin? According to Alice's explanation, it was necessary to control the intake of protein due to certain drugs. But it couldn't be that there was no protein at all, right? The worst thing was that there was no rice, no rice, no rice. The most tragic thing needed to be emphasized thrice. Xianxia's stomach was as big as a cow's, and he ate at least 2 bowls of rice per meal. However, there were only side dishes and no rice. Finally, after countless nutritious meals were served, Xianxia's body swayed and he was on the verge of collapsing. He was so hungry that he felt dizzy. Finally, with a plop, he fell head first into the plate of rice. Meat! Meat! Xianxia had a dream. He felt like he was looking at a huge piece of steak that had arms and legs and was running in front of him. As soon as he saw the meat, his eyes turned red. Drooling, he chased after them madly. Just as he was about to grab the meat, Lisa slapped him and woke him up. When Xianxia woke up, he realized that he was in Lisa's arms. He didn't know when, but his saliva had dripped onto her chest. Lisa's face turned green. She said coldly, "You can talk in your sleep?" Xianxia blinked in shock. He furrowed his brows and asked in confusion, "What did I just say?" Rover. Lisa said strangely, "It's a name." Xianxia pondered for a moment and scratched his head. "I dreamt of a piece of meat running in front of me." Lisa's eyes darkened. What? Did his flesh grow legs? Could his dream be any more absurd? Xianxia asked. "Why did I faint?" Lisa said coldly, "Low blood sugar. Low blood sugar." Xianxia sobbed. "I was healthy when I came here, but I've been starved to the point of hypoglycemia?" Lisa rolled her eyes. "Who asked you to eat so much?" "I haven't eaten meat in days. On the way here, because they were on the ship, the food was not very good. Originally, they thought that they would be able to eat to their heart's content, but in the end, what greeted them was green food. He was starving to the point of lovesickness. He really wanted to know how Yu had survived the past year. If he doesn't eat meat, won't Yu suffer from hypoglycemia? The medicine that Alice prescribed will help him replenish the effects he needs." It was rare for Lisa to speak so much. She glanced at him in disdain. "Are you awake? Can you get up and walk?" I'm starving to death." Xianxia said pitifully, "I want to eat meat." "Do you eat human meat?" Lisa asked. Xianxia looked at her in disdain. She was so skinny from head to toe. What was there to eat? Chapter 3582. They looked like 2 small steamed buns. Xianxia's face suddenly flushed red. Lisa glanced at him and looked at his expression. She then followed his gaze and it landed on her chest. No matter how stupid she was, she could tell that he was staring at her chest. Lisa's face darkened. Suddenly, she released her grip on Xianxia, causing him to lose his balance and fall to the ground with a loud thud. "Pervert!" Lisa scolded him coldly. Stepping over him, she went back to her room. Xianxia sat up from the ground and rubbed his butt in pain. Feeling wronged, he said, What? It hurts. Why wasn't she gentle at all? He saw that she was very respectful and gentle to Yu. It wasn't fair. Xiao Yichen nimbly got up from the ground and chased after Lisa. He muttered behind her, "Why are you so gentle to Yu but so violent to me?" Lisa rolled her eyes expressionlessly and ignored him. "Hey, since I'm replacing Yu now, you should treat me as Yu too. Be gentler." Lisa suddenly stopped in her tracks and turned around calmly. She looked at him meaningfully and said in a mocking tone, "Are you as smart as Yu? Are you as obedient as Yu? Yu isn't as perverted as you." As she said this, she glared coldly at Xiao Yichen and said coldly, "Mu Yichen, I'm warning you. If you stare at me again." Lisa instinctively covered her chest with her hands and said with an ashen face, "Keep your eyes to yourself. If you keep looking, I'll dig your eyes out." After Lisa finished speaking, she walked away. Xiao Yichen watched her leave in shock. He couldn't help but lament, "How violent." Even though Xiao Yichen was very resistant to green vegetables, he could only pretend to be calm and silently eat grass in order not to expose his identity. After 4 days, Xiao Yichen finally couldn't take it anymore. He started a hunger strike and insisted on eating meat. Lisa had no choice but to order the chef to prepare steak in the name of wanting to eat meat. At night, little Yichen lay in bed, clutching his growling stomach as he tossed and turned. He was so hungry that he could not fall asleep no matter how hard he tried. The lights suddenly came on. Lisa turned on the lights and walked in with a tray of food. At first, Xiao Yichen was sleepy and was about to fall asleep when he suddenly smelled an alluring aroma. He jumped up from the bed like a carp. He sniffed in the direction of the aroma. Lisa walked to the bed with a tray and said expressionlessly, "Get up and eat." Xiao Yichen moved closer. When he saw the steak on the plate, his eyes lit up. Meat, meat. Xiao Yichen was like a heretic from a cult as he sat upright and devoutly. Lisa picked up the food from the bed and placed the tray in front of him. Like a gust of wind, he devoured the large piece of steak in a matter of minutes. Lisa was dumbfounded. She stared blankly at the knife and fork in his hand, looking as if he still wasn't hungry. She asked eagerly, "Is there more? Are you a pig?" Lisa said angrily, "Even pigs don't eat as much as you." Xiao Yichen said pitifully, "I've been hungry for a few days. This bit of meat isn't even enough to fill the gaps between my teeth." Chapter 3583. Half an hour later, Lisa walked in with another tray. Other than steak, there were cheeseburgers, ham, and sugar eggs. Lisa walked into the kitchen and told the chef, "I'm still hungry. Fry another steak for me." The chef stared at her in shock. It was as though she was a mutated monster. Yu couldn't eat meat, and the nutritious meals were all vegetarian. They couldn't eat any protein or fat, so it would be suspicious if Xiao Yichen wanted to eat meat. Hence, Lisa braced herself and said that she wanted to eat. Alas, her appetite was pitifully small and was not even 1/6 of little Yichen's. Hence, when she mentioned that she wanted to have another serving of steak, the chefs looked at her as if they had seen a ghost. "Last meal. There's no more," Lisa warned. Xiao Yichen nodded like he was pounding garlic. He wolfed down the steak and digested the rest of the food. Only then did he feel a little full. He was so touched that he wanted to cry. Xiao Yichen licked the black pepper sauce on his knife and fork, still craving for more. Lisa sized him up coldly. This guy didn't look like an aristocrat at all. Instead, he looked like a starving refugee. "The way you eat isn't elegant at all." "Bad review." Xiao Yichen's lips twitched. He retorted, "A full man doesn't know the suffering of a starving man. Try starving yourself." "How rare. You didn't even know how to do idioms and basic arithmetic in the past. It's been a while, but you've improved." Xiao Yichen said indignantly, "Who says I don't know how to do arithmetic? Give me the questions, and I'll show you." Lisa mocked. "Do you think I'm as childish as you?" "Humph. I don't think you know how to do arithmetic either." Xiao Yichen sized her up with contempt. "Do you know how to multiply 10 by 10? Lisa looked at him with even more contempt. She asked, "What's 15 multiplied by 78 and divided by 20? Xiao Yichen was speechless. He was dumbfounded. This arithmetic problem wasn't something that could be solved with just fingers. The problem was that even though his arithmetic skills had improved, he still needed to use what Yu had taught him. He was far from being able to do mental arithmetic. Can you do it? 58. 5. Idiot. Xiao Yichen threw himself onto the bed, feeling wronged. Lisa took the tray away and said disdainfully, "Tell me, why are you and Yu twins? Why is Yu so smart and you so stupid?" After saying that, she walked away as light as a feather. Xiao Yichen clenched his fists in anger. He glared at her back and gritted his teeth. How infuriating. He was actually despised. Sleep. Xiao Yichen lay on the bed, hugged the blanket, and closed his eyes angrily. However, Lisa's disdainful gaze kept flashing through his mind. Idiot! 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 The demonic voice kept repeating in his ears. Xiao Yichen couldn't take it anymore. He sat up and threw the pillow on the floor. You're the idiot. At the Mu residence. Xianxia finished preparing dinner. She walked to the bedroom and gently knocked on the door. Yu. There was no response. Xianxia opened the bedroom door and saw Yu sitting on the bed, expressionlessly looking out the window. She said gently, "It's time for dinner." Yu didn't move. Even his breathing was so weak that it was almost inaudible. Chapter 3584. Seeing that he didn't respond, Xianxia walked into the room and closed the door slowly. She walked over to him quietly and squatted down in front of him. However, she saw that his eyes were as still as a pool of stagnant water. There was no sign of life. Xiaxia's heart ached terribly. She couldn't help but lift her hand, wanting to caress his face. However, Yu narrowed his eyes and slapped her hand away in disgust. There was a loud slap. The back of her hand was slapped to the side by him. There should be a limit to your wishful thinking. Yu glanced at her coldly. Wherever his gaze landed, it was as if frost had struck. Xianxia could only feel that pair of cold eyes landing on her face. Every inch of her skin was about to be frozen into ice. Every time she saw his cold expression, Xiaxia's heart felt like it was being stabbed. How did he become like this? Xiaxia bit her lip hard as tears streamed down her face uncontrollably. Because of his heartless words, her heart was extremely broken. Why are you crying? Yu said in annoyance. You only know how to cry. Even if you want to cry, don't do it in front of me. It's an eyesore. As he said this, he stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. His voice was emotionless as he said, "It's time to stop acting." Xiaxia's heart ached as she said, Yu, I don't know why you've become like this. But, I'm your mommy. Yu. Yu closed his eyes. Finally, he turned around impatiently and said coldly, "Don't call me by that damn name again." Damn it. When Xiaxia heard this, she felt as if she had been hit hard. It was undoubtedly heart-wrenching. Yu, that was his name. He had said before that no matter what, he would never change his name or his surname. His surname was Yun, and his name was Tianyu. His surname was Yun, and his name was Yu. This was the name his mommy had given him, and he cherished it very much. But now, Yu was coldly saying that it was a damn name. Xiaxia felt as if a knife was being twisted in her heart. Yaya! Outside the door, a childish voice suddenly sounded. Xiaxia looked up and saw that the door was suddenly opened from the outside. Mu Yaja was standing at the door, holding the pink little Yueyao in his arms. Gong Jie said softly beside him, Yueyao kept calling for her brother. Mu Yaja walked in with Yueyao in his arms. When the little Yueyao saw Xiaxia, she immediately opened her arms and babbled, asking for a hug. Xiaxia took Yueyao from Mu Yaja's arms. She gently held her little hand and kissed her forehead. She said to her, "Yes, brother is back. Brother is back." Yueyao followed her gaze and looked at the figure by the bed. Her gaze suddenly froze. Brother. Brother. Her young and tender voice was filled with childishness. It was clear and melodious like a wind chime, tinkling and extremely pleasing to the ear. Yu looked back and saw the little fellow in Xiaxia's arms. Her skin was as white as snow, and her eyes were big and watery. Her eyelashes were long and curly. Even though she was only 2 years old, her eyebrows were already beginning to take shape. Her facial features were actually somewhat similar to his. He couldn't help but be stunned. Yueyao suddenly stretched out her little hand, raised a finger, and pointed at him. She looked up at Xianxia and opened her little mouth. Brother. Brother. Xianxia's eyes couldn't help but sting. She immediately said, Yes, it's brother. It's brother. She still remembered. Chapter 3585. When Yueyao saw Xiaxia's affirmation, she felt greatly encouraged. She was so excited that she babbled and struggled to get down. Xianxia squatted down and placed her on the ground. Yueyao took a step forward and suddenly lost her balance. She fell hard on the ground. However, she didn't seem to feel pain. She clumsily stuck out her butt and got up from the ground. She opened her small hands and walked unsteadily towards Yu. She was wearing the squeaky shoes that Wuxia had bought. When she walked, every step she took would make a squeaking sound and shine. In the beginning, Yueyao didn't like to walk. She kept pestering Xianxia to carry her. After Xianxia was done carrying her, she would let Xiao Yichen carry her, followed by her daddy. When they went out, they would always carry her in their arms. Even when she was old enough to walk, she didn't like to jump around on the ground. She was extremely quiet. Hence, Wuxia bought many pairs of such shoes. The little girl found it extremely novel. Every time she took a step, she would squeak. Hence, she started to walk more diligently. Even though she wasn't walking very smoothly, it was considered very smooth. Little Yueyao walked to Yu's side. Seeing that she was about to trip, she hugged Yu's leg tightly and sat on the ground. She hugged Yu like a lazy koala bear. She looked up and smiled foolishly at him. This smile was as if all 3,000 worlds were shining brightly. When she smiled, her 2 front teeth were as cute as a rabbit's. She was mischievous and cute. Yueyao squeaked, Brother! Brother! She spoke fluently and clearly. Yu understood her immediately. He turned his face away awkwardly and didn't look at her. Seeing that Yu was ignoring her, Yueyao couldn't help but feel aggrieved. She tugged at Yu's trousers with her 2 little hands. She even wanted to climb up Yu's trousers. She really looked like a koala bear. Just as Xianxia revealed a gratified smile, she saw Yu take a step back and avoid Yueyao. Yueyao lost her balance and fell to the ground. She sat up and instantly felt unhappy. Her entire little face scrunched up as if she had suffered a great grievance. Brother! She felt so aggrieved that 2 silver beads appeared at the corners of her eyes. She pursed her lips but held it in. When Xianxia saw this, she immediately walked over and wanted to carry Yueyao. However, Yueyao pushed her away. Even though she was only 2 years old, she had inherited Wuxia's stubbornness and aloofness. She stubbornly refused to be carried by Xianxia. She stood up again and staggered towards Yu. Yu widened his eyes in surprise. However, he saw that she had already walked in front of him and was hugging him like a koala bear. Her eyes were full of attachment. Brother! Yueyao held back her tears stubbornly and refused to let go. She wanted him to carry her. Yu remained unmoved, but his eyes were flickering fiercely. He turned his face away and didn't look at her anymore. After a long silence he said word by word, I'm not your brother. Yueyao widened her eyes. Obviously, she didn't understand what he said. However, when she saw his resolute expression, she couldn't hold back her aggrieved emotions any longer. Tears rolled down her cheeks. Boo-hoo! Yueyao hugged his leg and cried pitifully. Chapter 3586. You used to like her a lot. You kept hugging her and teaching her how to call you brother. Now that she's learned it, you're ignoring her when she calls you that. Yueyao pouted pitifully. She cried as she said, Brother is ignoring her. Brother is ignoring her. Yu turned around expressionlessly and said coldly, I'm not interested in playing house with you. So get lost. Yu turned around coldly and sat back on the bed like an ice sculpture. Xianxia carried Yueyao, sighed, and left. The door closed softly. Yu looked back slightly and glanced at the door. His eyes were cold, but there was a flash of absent-mindedness in the depths of his eyes. Yueyao's teary eyes appeared in his mind and his thoughts became even more chaotic. He fell on the bed, covered himself with the blanket, and closed his eyes. Outside the door, Wuxia and Xianxia looked at Xianxia's disappointed and gloomy face. They looked at each other. Xianxia said, Sure, don't worry. Yu didn't mean what he said. He doesn't remember you, and he doesn't remember Yueyao either. It's understandable that he treats you as an enemy. Mu Yaja agreed with Gong Jie and said comfortingly, "Take it slow." "What if?" Xianxia said worriedly. "What if he can't remember me for the rest of his life?" "Don't be so pessimistic," Gong Jie said with a headache. "Compared to you, I'm more worried about you." He was worried that she would be disappointed, despaired, upset, and unable to recover from this setback. Xianxia shook her head and said calmly, "No, I won't. I will become stronger. At this time, Yu needs me more. Xiaojia, don't worry." She smiled at him. Gong Jie took Yueyao from her arms. Seeing that she was still sulking with tears hanging from the corners of her eyes, he kissed the corner of her eyes and coaxed, "Yueyao, don't cry. Uncle will carry you." "Uncle." Yueyao threw herself into his arms and wrapped her arms around his neck. Gong Jie was overjoyed. It was rare for Yueyao to be so close to him. She took the initiative to wrap her arms around his neck. He couldn't help but kiss her again and again. He couldn't bear to part with her. Mu Yaja said coldly, "If you like it so much, give birth to one yourself." Gong Jie snorted. "No, I love Yueyao the most." As he spoke, he subconsciously shielded her, worried that Mu Yaja would snatch Yueyao from his arms. When Xianxia saw these two clowns, her mood finally recovered a little. It was as if sunlight had shone into her heart. It didn't matter. It didn't matter that Yu didn't remember her. She would try her best to make him remember her. It was late at night. Yu lay in bed. Even though he hadn't eaten for a day, he didn't feel hungry. He always carried the medicine that Alice had concocted with him. To a certain extent, these medicines would make him feel full and replenish his various bodily functions. He looked at the ceiling. There was no emotion in his cold eyes. Suddenly, footsteps came from outside the door. Following that, there was a long silence. It seemed that the person hesitated for a long time. Finally, she took the doorknob and pushed the door open. In the darkness, the footsteps slowly walked in. Yu's handsome brows were slightly raised. He closed his eyes but didn't close them tightly. Through the gaps of his eyes, he saw a slender figure slowly walk to his bedside and sit on the edge of the bed quietly. "Yu." A fair hand slowly caressed his cheek and tucked his hair behind his ear. Chapter 3587. Yu did not say a word and pretended to be asleep. Xianxia looked at him quietly. She could not wait to make up for the yearning she had for him over the past year through this one look. This one look felt like 10,000 years. She could not help but recall how he looked when he was just born. His wrinkled little face was red. After being rescued and returned to the incubator, he looked so weak that it was as if he would leave her at any time. She had just gone through childbirth, but she still insisted on visiting him every hour with Yun Yeqing's help. In the beginning, she was weak, but later on, she slowly regained some vitality. Her two small hands began to wave and grasp the air. Her legs also began to kick. The first time she took him out of the incubator to feed him, he was born prematurely at 8 months. He was so small that he was as light as a feather. She still remembered the first time he opened his eyes. Those jet-black eyes were like inlaid agates, filled with a lively luster. He opened his eyes and smiled at her, revealing his pink gums. The first time he said, "Mommy," was inadvertently when she was busy tripping rice noodles for him. The little guy was playing with his toys when he suddenly said, "Mommy." She turned around in surprise and walked up to him. She asked him to say it again, but he only cared about his toys and smiled at her foolishly. He did not say it again. However, Xianxia was still so excited that she could not calm herself down. God knew how long she had been waiting for this sentence. Every time she taught him how to pronounce it, she would exaggeratedly open her mouth and he would be amused by her. Gradually, he grew up and became more mischievous. However, at this time, his body was still weak and he often had to go to the hospital. Thus, throughout the year, the empty ward had become his permanent base. She remembered one time when he was very active and rolled down from the hospital bed. She was so shocked that she rushed over and picked him up. He cried out loud in pain. He rarely cried. Even when he was injected, he was so stubborn that he did not shed a single tear. This fall, however, he cried and hugged her tightly. She coaxed him for a while before he finally stopped crying. He grabbed her clothes and quietly fell asleep. It wasn't until he was 5 years old that his physical condition gradually stabilized. She liked to take him to the park for a walk. Every time she came back at noon, he would obediently prepare lunch and wait for her to come and have lunch together. He didn't know how to cook from the very beginning. At first, when he learned how to cook, the fried rice turned into a black paste. She was so angry that she scolded him and told him not to go into the kitchen without permission. It wasn't because the food he made wasn't delicious, but she was worried that he would cut his hand with a knife at such a young age. What if he accidentally caught fire? She didn't dare imagine what would happen. However, Yu Yu's talent in cooking seemed to be innate. As time passed, the food she cooked became more and more delicious. From Chinese food, to Western food, to Japanese food, to Italian food, it was all very easy for him. She was touched, but her heart ached at the same time. Even if the Yu Yu who knew how to dote on mommy, the Yu Yu who knew how to do housework, the Yu Yu who knew how to cook, the Yu Yu who knew how to do housework, the Yu Yu who knew how to cook, and the Yu Yu who was very very capable never came back, it's fine. Chapter 3588. Xianxia hugged his shoulders and her tears fell uncontrollably onto his face. Whether you remember it or not, you'll always be mommy's Yu Yu. Mommy really misses you. Really, really misses you. It's mommy's fault. Mommy didn't protect you well. No matter how harsh or heartless you are, mommy won't blame you. But don't leave mommy again. Boiling hot tears continuously dripped onto his cheeks and rolled down his cheeks endlessly. She held his face in her hands and gently kissed his forehead. Her tears fell straight onto his eyelashes, slid through his eyes, and trickled down from the corners of his eyes. Yu Yu could only feel his vision becoming blurry. Her tears seemed to flow from her eyes and into his heart. His heart tightened and convulsed inexplicably. He felt as if he was going to suffocate and turn the world upside down. Why was she crying? Don't cry. Her tears made his heart feel like it was going to explode. Why did her tears cause him to lose control of himself? Hearing her sobbing, he suddenly felt a sharp pain in his heart, as if it was going to pierce through his heart. What was going on? What exactly was going on? Yu Yu suddenly felt a sharp pain in his head. His heart was in a mess and he couldn't help but frown. When he came back to his senses, he felt Xianxia's body stiffen. He then realized that his arms had unknowingly wrapped around her shoulders. It was as if he had lost control and hugged her uncontrollably. Yu Yu was so shocked that he pushed her away and sat up on the bed. Although he tried to hide it, he couldn't hide the embarrassment that he was showing at this moment. Xianxia came back to her senses and stared at him in disbelief. Yu Yu's breathing quickened. He stared at her warily and leaned his back against the bed. He said coldly, "Are you done crying?" Xianxia was stunned. His change was so sudden that she was not mentally prepared. When he hugged her just now, she really thought that Yu Yu was back. However, it was just a moment of joy before everything returned to normal. Yu Yu said coldly, "You don't have to show such an expression." He turned his head and looked out the window, deliberately not looking at her lamenting expression. "Yu Yu, do you know why I call you Yu Yu?" Xianxia said, "When you were born prematurely and almost died. I'm glad that God's blessing. You are the best gift to me. That's why I named you Yun Tian Yu." Ha! How interesting. I'll say this one last time. My name is Gong Fan, not Yun Tian Yu. As he said that, his head was suddenly felt. He was in pain. The pain, Yu. She asked worriedly, "What's wrong? Do you have a headache?" She rushed out of the door in a hurry, found the medicine box, and rummaged through it. Finally, she found the painkillers. Carrying a glass of water, she walked into the room and passed it to him. "This is a painkiller. Take it and your head won't hurt anymore." Enough! Yu Yu had a splitting headache and was extremely irritated. The berserk factor in his body was fermenting. He flung her hand away. "Go away." Chapter 3589. The sudden movement caused the two of them to freeze. Yu Yu stared at the shattered glass on the floor, feeling inexplicably frustrated. Xianxia lowered her head and stared at the shattered glass. For a moment, she couldn't figure out whether it was the glass that had shattered or her heart. Xianxia pursed her lips as tears rolled down her cheeks. Suddenly, she knelt down on one knee and picked up the shattered glass pieces. "Mommy, in the future, let's use the same glass as a family of 4, okay?" She could still remember how Yu Yu had excitedly brought 5 glasses to Yueyao not long after she was born. 3 of the glasses had adorable suns on them while the other 2 had beautiful moons on them. Yu had said that his daddy, Xianxia, and he were the suns that protected the moons and gave them warmth. The moons were bright because of the suns. Gongjie even threw a tantrum at one point, displeased that none of the 5 cups belonged to him. However, Yu had muttered, "You're a married uncle, and you're a spilled bucket of water. It's not yours." He had carefully placed the 5 glasses on the rack and marked them separately. Her tears continued to drip onto the carpet, staining it. She picked up the shattered glass pieces bit by bit until her gaze fell on the suns. Suddenly, her fingertips started to tremble uncontrollably. In a moment of carelessness, she accidentally cut her fingertips. A drop of blood appeared on the wound. However, she didn't feel the pain at all. She held the shattered glass pieces in her hands as her sad tears fell silently. When Yu saw this, especially when he saw Xianxia's tear-stained face, he couldn't help but grip the bed sheets tightly. The bed sheets were crumpled into a ball, just like his inner world at that moment. "Stop picking them up." Little did he know that the moment he finished speaking, Xianxia's tears fell even more violently and she started to sob. Yu frowned again. He felt a headache coming on when he heard her crying. He held his forehead and looked helplessly at Xianxia, who was squatting by the bed and holding back her tears. He didn't know what to do with her. In fact, you already knew why Alice came to the island. You also recognized Gongjie and me. The sea breeze on the island blew gently. Xianxia put on a jacket and sat on the beach. The bright moon seemed to be half submerged in the sea, but it also seemed to be rising from the sea. It was a beautiful sight. Lisa stood beside him and looked at the moon that seemed to be immersed in the sea. It was as if the sea water was the tears of the moon that had gathered to form the sea. She didn't say anything. She sat down beside Xianxia and gazed at the distant horizon. Her lips twitched as she said, "I work for young Master Jie. How could I not recognize him?" Xianxia turned to look at her in surprise. "So, you did it on purpose?" "On purpose." Lisa smiled. "What do you mean on purpose?" "You knew that Yu and I were swapped, but you still allowed Gongjie to take Yu away." Lisa didn't say anything, but it was a silent admission. "Why?" Xianxia didn't understand. "Isn't your mission and duty to take care of Yu? If he was taken away, it means that you didn't fulfill your duty. Aren't you worried that Gong Xiaoying will hold you accountable?" Lisa didn't answer. Instead she asked, "Do you know what faith is?" Chapter 3590. What do you believe in? Xianxia asked. Lisa looked at the moon and narrowed her eyes. She said mockingly, "Belief? I don't have any." Ever since she could remember, her family had been destroyed and her family had died. She and hundreds of other war orphans like her had been brought to Atlanta Island. On Atlanta Island, there was a fearsome assassin organization. Every year, they would recruit war orphans or refugees of different skin colors, ages, and genders from all over the world. Hundreds of children were locked up in a huge cage. They were only given a bowl of rice and a glass of water. Hundreds of children were only given a bowl of rice and a glass of water. Every child was hungry. What did this mean? This meant that even if they wanted to eat a mouthful of rice, they would have to face hundreds of children fighting each other. If they were hungry, they would only be given a bowl of rice. If they were thirsty, they would have a glass of water. In order to fill their stomachs and survive, the children would start to fight each other. Some were born weak and unwilling to fight. In the end, they could only starve to death. Most of the children would fight with their lives. Everyone wanted to live. No one was an exception. She was the same. At that time, her belief was that she did not want to go hungry. In the beginning, she was unable to recover from the setback. She was weak and could not compete with the children who formed cliques. However, hunger was like a beast. Once hungry, the primitive hunting instinct in her body would be fully activated. She started to fight and snatch. Gradually, from a mouthful of water to a mouthful of rice, until she could snatch half a bowl of rice and half a glass of water. Gradually, many children starved to death. Corpses were constantly being dragged away from the cage. However, the other children did not dare to leave the cage. They were like livestock in captivity. Later, a bowl of rice became half a bowl of rice, and a glass of water became half a glass of water. Eventually, they stopped eating and drinking. At that time, many children had already gone crazy. They were all brought from war-torn lands. Some were even natives. They did not have the concept of law and did not have the principle of killing or not killing. They only wanted to live. When they were hungry and uncomfortable, they wanted to eat. When there was no food, even if they gnawed the flesh of a living person, they would still devour it. Children who were unwilling to eat became living prey. At this time, it was necessary to resist those children who formed cliques. In the end, Lisa and the other children survived, but at that time, all the children were on the verge of death. She was not surprised. The moment she crawled out of the rope, she naively thought, was she finally free? The belief then was to live in this warm sunshine. However, after the children were brought out, they were immediately sent to the next round of devil training. The so-called devil training was hellish. The weak would die, and the strong would survive. Perhaps in the end, there would only be one person who could survive all the trials. Lisa was the only child who survived during that period. However, after the cruel competition, she didn't even have a basic belief. It was precisely because he had no faith that his heart ached for Yu. After the first personality was destroyed by the second personality, it became Gong Fan's Yu. It was like a numb and cruel zombie. It had no feelings, no beliefs, and no goals. Empty ambition. Chapter 3591. When she had first met Yu, this child was so special. On one hand, he was ruthless and unscrupulous. On the other hand, he was as warm as ever, just like the bright and beautiful sun shining on one's heart. However, this warmth was only vividly displayed in front of Xianxia. At that time, Yu was loved, knew how to love and enjoy being loved. He was blissful. Now, Yu was sitting there, but he was as empty as a painting. He was still as if there was no trace of life in him. She knew very well that Yu was not happy at all. Therefore, she had deliberately let Yu go. At least, when Yu was brought back to the Mu family, there would be people who would love and protect him. They would not bear to use him. Now, her belief was that her little master would be able to smile from the bottom of his heart like he did in the past. Xiao Yichen took a deep look at Lisa. It was as if something in his heart had been deeply touched. Xianxia hugged the broken shards. Her tears kept falling onto the carpet and her lips were trembling. She did not even notice that the shards had cut her palms and blood was seeping out. Yu casually switched on the wall lamp and saw the tears on her face clearly. At that moment, he did not know what to do. In the past, he had never felt so helpless. Now that he was faced with such a sad woman, it was as if there was an invisible hand mercilessly tearing his heart into pieces. He suddenly blurted out, "All right, don't cry." However, Xianxia was unmoved. When she thought of the 5 cups that Yu had bought and one of them was missing, she was so sad that tears kept falling. "Don't cry." Yu threw the table lamp on the floor in frustration. He did not know how to stop her tears, let alone how to comfort her. He only knew that when he saw her tears, his heart would also hurt. When he saw her sad, he would also feel very sad. Xianxia looked up and saw Yu's impatient expression. She then stood up and left with the shards in her arms. Not long after, she came back in again. Wearing gloves and a vacuum cleaner, she cleaned up all the shards on the carpet. You should sleep early." After Xianxia finished speaking, she awkwardly wiped her tears and left the room. Yu looked in the direction of the closed door. She could not help but feel a little dazed. He lay down on the bed, but he could no longer fall asleep. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. No matter what, it was difficult for him to fall asleep. He suddenly sat up and got off the bed. He opened the door and walked to the living room. This was the first time he walked out of his room since he returned to the Mu family. On the table in the living room, there were a few pieces of paper towels. On the paper towels, there were a few pieces that formed a sun. Xianxia couldn't bear to throw it away, so she pieced the pieces together. Yu glanced at it and his heart seemed to be in turmoil. He turned around and looked around. Suddenly, he saw a few white blankets on the cupboard beside the table. He frowned and walked over as if he was possessed by gods and demons. Yu took the quilts and walked into the room. He sat in front of the study table and casually opened the drawer. There were a few boxes of paints in the drawer. He squeezed the paints into the palette, picked up a pen and dipped it in the paints. Then, he slowly drew a circle on the surface of the empty cup. Yu suddenly realized that he was doing something childish. He frowned and put the cup on the table with a look of disgust. He turned around and was about to go to bed. Chapter 3592. In his mind, he couldn't help but recall Xianxia's misty, teary eyes. His heart was in a mess. Yu looked at the cup on the table and hesitated. Finally, he sat back down. The next day, Xianxia walked to the room door and knocked gently, but there was no response. She pushed the door open and walked in. She saw Yu wrapped in the blanket on the bed, still sleeping. She walked to the bedside quietly. She was worried that she would wake him up, so her footsteps were light and slow. As she walked past the study table, her gaze was attracted by a cup on the table. Xianxia followed his gaze. She remembered that this cup was used to serve guests. Why was it placed here? She casually picked up the cup, but from the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of the neatly packed paints and brushes, as well as the unwashed color palette. She couldn't help but be startled, and slowly turned the cup over. On the other side, there was an exquisite simple drawing on the white surface of the cup. There was a small sun drawn on the cup. Although the strokes were simple, the drawing was exquisite. It was exactly the same as the sun on the cup that Yu had bought previously. Xianxia's heart skipped a beat. This was drawn by Yu. It was unbelievable. Xianxia looked at the bed. Yu was still sleeping. He was curled up under the blanket and sleeping soundly. Her gaze fell on the cup again. The sun on the cup had been drawn for a long time and the paint had dried up. She felt warmth in her heart, as if the sun was shining on her. This was drawn by Yu. Could it be that he had drawn a new cup because he had accidentally broken the cup yesterday? Xianxia was extremely touched at this thought. She held the cup lovingly. She left the room with the cup in her arms. In the living room, Wuxia was cleaning up the table. When he woke up in the morning, he saw the broken cup on the table. Xianxia pieced the sun together. He knew in his heart that Yu must have upset him again last night. Xianxia had always treated this cup like a treasure. During that period of time, she had always held this cup. This cup had accompanied her through the most torturous period of her life. However, now that it was broken, it was natural for her to be upset. For the entire morning, she was in low spirits and her eyes were swollen. It was obvious that she had cried a lot last night. When Xianxia walked into the living room with a cup drawn by Yu, she raised the cup in front of Wuxia as if she was presenting a treasure. She smiled and said, "Look, this was drawn by Yu." Wuxia couldn't help but be surprised. He took the cup from her hand. Xianxia was still worried as she reminded him, "Be careful. Don't drop it." "It won't drop." Wuxia comforted her. His gaze fell on the cup, but he smiled and said, "One look and I can tell that it was drawn by that little thing. Do you think that Yu drew this cup because he saw me sad so?" "That's probably it. Although he has lost his memories, there are some feelings in his bones that can't be cut off." Wuxia comforted her and said, "Don't worry and don't be too anxious. Take it slow. His memories will slowly recover." Xianxia was also encouraged. She nodded vigorously as hope ignited in her heart. Initially, she had thought that there was no hope for Yu to recover his memories. Chapter 3593. On the fourth day of Yu's return to the Mu family, he finally started to eat. Xianxia personally cooked a bowl of noodles. She wasn't a good cook, but in the past year or so when Yu wasn't around, she started to study her culinary skills. She started from recipes and attended some culinary training classes. Gradually, she was able to take charge of the kitchen. She brought the bowl of noodles into the room. Yu was sitting on the bed, flipping through the books on the bookshelf. When he saw her walk in, he put the books back into the bookshelf with an indifferent look on his face. Xianxia smiled and placed the bowl of noodles on the table. She said to him, "Yu, eat something. If you don't eat, you'll starve." When Yu heard this, he turned his face away. However, his attitude was no longer as repulsive as before. Instead, he said indifferently, "I don't want to eat." "You haven't eaten for 4 days." Xianxia pleaded, "Eat something, okay? Mommy will feed you." She paused for a moment. Worried that he would resist, she changed the way she addressed him. "I'll feed you." Yu sat in front of the study table and looked at her steadily. He didn't reject her, but he didn't agree either. Xianxia walked over to him tentatively. She moved a chair over and sat in front of him. With one hand, she used a fork to roll up the noodles and put it in his mouth. Yu looked at her expressionlessly. Suddenly, he opened his small mouth. Xianxia was overjoyed when she saw this. However, she didn't dare to show her happiness on her face. She suppressed her excitement and fed him. It wasn't until he swallowed the mouthful of noodles that she believed that he was willing to eat. If he was willing to eat, it was a huge breakthrough. She couldn't help but feel touched. She persuaded him again. Eat another mouthful, okay? Yu still felt awkward and didn't say anything. He just stared at the noodles in her hand. The noodles she cooked weren't that amazing, but perhaps he was really hungry. He actually felt that this bowl of noodles was very fragrant. Xianxia tried to feed him another mouthful of noodles, and he obediently opened his mouth and took another mouthful. When she saw it, she was so moved that she wanted to cry. The fact that he could eat was something she had never thought of. She even thought that if he was still unwilling to eat, she would really be at her wit's end. At that time, she would have no choice but to forcibly inject him with a nutrient solution. Now that he was willing to eat, Xianxia was greatly gratified. After what happened last night, the little fellow was no longer so resistant. The little guy finished the bowl full of noodles. Xianxia tried to feed him a few mouthfuls of soup, and Yu drank it obediently. As long as she fed him, he would no longer refuse. When Xianxia walked out of the room with the empty bowl, Gongjie came over. When he saw the empty bowl, he was a little suspicious. Is he willing to eat? Xianxia nodded agitatedly. Yes. This bowl of noodles was all eaten by him. Oh my God! Gongjie widened his eyes in disbelief. He's finally willing to eat. It's just that his attitude towards me is still so cold. When he opened his mouth to eat the noodles, she even suspected that he had finally regained his memory. However, when she took the bowl of noodles and left the room, his back was still facing her coldly. He didn't even look at her once. She then realized that if he had really regained his memory, Yu wouldn't treat her so coldly. Chapter 3594. At night, when Xianxia finished cooking the noodles, Gongjie volunteered to bring it into the room. Xianxia was a little hesitant, but Gongjie said coquettishly, Sure, let me as your uncle perform a little. All right. Gongjie took the bowl of noodles from her hands. Xianxia cautioned him carefully, Be careful, it's hot. Hence, Gongjie carried the bowl of noodles into the room. However, within a few minutes, the sound of porcelain shattering could be heard from the room. Xianxia and Wuxia heard the commotion and stood up in shock. They rushed into the room, only to see Gongjie standing at the side with a stunned expression. Yu was sitting on the bed, and the floor was littered with broken bowls and soup. It was a complete mess. Gongjie turned his head innocently and glanced at Xianxia bitterly. He mouthed, Yu is so fierce. It turned out that when he carried the bowl of noodles into the room, Yu heard the door open and thought that it was Xianxia. He sat up on the bed and saw that it was Gongjie. When he carried the bowl of noodles in front of him and was about to feed him, Yu waved his hand coldly and knocked the bowl of noodles out of his hand onto the floor. After Xianxia cleaned up the mess on the floor, the three of them left the room. Gongjie looked sad and lonely. Why did he knock over your bowl of noodles? Xianxia found it unbelievable. What did you say? Gongjie said sadly, I just brought it in and didn't say anything. But he knocked over my bowl of noodles. As he said this, he crossed his arms and said angrily, That's too much. How could it be? Wuxia said. Maybe it's because you're not likable as an uncle. Gongjie was speechless. He was speechless. He said provocatively, Brother-in-law, that means you're very confident. That kid must have knocked over the bowl of noodles that you brought in. Wuxia said confidently, How is that possible? That is my son. Gongjie said, Try it then. I'll give it a try then. Wuxia cooked the noodles and brought them in. Gongjie stood at the door and started counting down. 5, 4, 3, 2. Before he could count to 1, the sound of porcelain being overturned came from the room again. Gongjie and Xianxia walked in and saw Wuxia standing beside the bed with an ashen face. The floor was also in a mess. Yu sat on the bed with an unapproachable posture. His face was as cold as ever. Poochie. Gongjie covered his mouth and held back his laughter. He had a smug expression on his face that said, I was right, wasn't I? Mu Yaja glared at him. Gong Jie glared back at him indignantly. Yunshishir immediately said to Gong Jie, "Go out first." "Sister, go out." Gong Jie left the room feeling wronged. Yunshishir then said to Mu Yaja, "You go out too." Mu Yaja looked like he wanted to say something, but he didn't. Instead, he left the room. Yunshishir cleaned up the mess on the floor, cooked another bowl of noodles, and brought it into the room. In fact, she was feeling a little nervous. In the afternoon, Yu was willing to eat. Perhaps he was really starving. She didn't know if there would be a second time. Yunshishir carefully inched closer to the bedside. Yu, who was leaning against the headboard, stared at her expressionlessly with a cold look on his face. She probed, "Eat something, okay?" Yu didn't say a word and just looked at her silently. Chapter 3595. The noodles have just been cooked and are still warm. As she said this, she lifted a mouthful of noodles and cautiously brought it to his mouth. Yu's gaze fell on the bowl of noodles and he suddenly raised his hand. Yunshishir thought that he was going to knock the bowl over and instinctively retracted her hand. However, she saw him suddenly straighten the bowl of noodles. It turned out that her bowl of noodles was tilted to one side and was about to spill out. Yunshishir's anxious heart then calmed down a little. However, she saw that Yu obediently ate a mouthful of noodles and didn't show any signs of resistance. She was so excited that her hands were trembling. She had never expected that Yu would really accept her. If it weren't for Mu Yaja and Gong Jie, she would have thought that Yu was only eating because he was hungry. However, when Gong Jie and Mu Yaja came in, Yu had knocked over the bowls in their hands. However, when she fed him, he didn't show any signs of resistance. Instead, he obediently ate a mouthful of noodles. Had he accepted her from the bottom of his heart? Yunshishir was greatly encouraged. Even though he still didn't say anything and still looked cold, he didn't even look at her. However, his willingness to eat what she fed him made Yunshishir's originally gloomy heart gradually brighten up. Halfway through the noodles, he lowered his head and refused to eat any more. Yunshishir persuaded again. "Yu, eat another mouthful. If you only eat this little, you'll be hungry at night." Yu looked at her deeply. After a long time, he finally relented and ate another mouthful. When he finished the noodles, Yunshishir asked him if he wanted some soup. He shook his head. However, she looked very surprised. Wouldn't he choke if he only ate noodles? However, she was already very touched when he finished the noodles, so she didn't ask for more. When she was about to clear the bowl, she asked, "Is it good?" Initially, she thought that he would remain silent like before. However, Yu suddenly opened his mouth and said coldly, "It tastes awful." Yunshishir was shocked. She picked up the bowl and drank a mouthful of soup. It was so salty that she frowned. So salty? How could he eat it? Yunshishir felt a little guilty. It took a lot of willpower for him to finish all the noodles that tasted so bad. She could not help but laugh. She looked at Yu and said in embarrassment, "It's so disgusting. It must have been hard on you." Yu looked at her and smiled. She was stunned. When she smiled, she was very beautiful and charming. Especially, it made him feel an inexplicable warmth. It was like the most difficult sunlight in winter. His cold and stiff lips couldn't help but relax a little. However, when Yunshishir looked at him again, he resumed his cold expression. He looked away and didn't want to look at her again. When Yunshishir walked out with the bowl of noodles, Mu Yaja and Gong Jie gathered around. When they saw that there was only soup left in the bowl, they were so shocked that they couldn't close their mouths. "He ate it all?" "Yeah." Gong Jie immediately said unhappily, "That's not fair. Why did this fellow knock over our bowls when brother-in-law and I brought the noodles in?" Mu Yaja couldn't hold it in anymore. He glared at him and said, "Shut up." Gong Jie said, "That's the truth." Mu Yaja changed the topic. "In any case, it's a good thing that he's willing to eat, no matter who feeds him." Yunshishir nodded. There were tears in her eyes. She immediately wiped them away with her fingers and smiled. This meant that Yu had started to accept her. This was indeed an amazing breakthrough. Chapter 3596. She felt warm inside. She had accidentally spilled a lot of salt when she was cooking the noodles. Even so, he still finished all the noodles. As she thought of this, she felt both guilty and warm at the same time. Xianxia carried the new clothes into the room. Yu was already lying down. When he saw her enter, he turned around and looked at her warily. He slowly sat up on the bed. Xianxia smiled and said, "Let me help you bathe, okay?" Yu narrowed his eyes and frowned, but he still didn't say a word. Since he didn't say anything, Xianxia took it as a silent agreement. She walked to the bed and reached out to carry him. However, Yu shrunk his shoulders and tried to avoid her. Xianxia picked him up at once. They hadn't seen each other for more than a year. He had grown taller and heavier than before. Carrying him was starting to take some effort. Yu instinctively wrapped his arms around her neck and looked angry. "What are you doing?" "I'm carrying you to the bathroom." Xianxia pretended to sniff his body and said teasingly, "How many days has it been since you last bathed? Don't you feel that you stink?" Yu's face turned strangely red. Xianxia continued, "I remember that you have a serious obsession with cleanliness. You'll go crazy if you don't bathe for a day. Now, you don't care about cleanliness that much?" Yu flew into a rage out of humiliation. He glared at her and said, "Shut up. Let go." Xianxia became bolder. She didn't let go of him and carried him to the bathroom. The bathtub was already filled with water. Xianxia placed Yu on the floor. She squatted in front of him and reached out to take off his clothes. However, Yu turned his back to her and held his shirt tightly, not allowing her to touch him. Xianxia didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Was this guy being shy? Perhaps, after growing up, some men and women began to have different thoughts. In the past, Yu loved it when mommy bathed you. Why are you so shy now? Xianxia held back her laughter and turned his body around, only to see that he had a death grip on her collar, preventing her from unbuttoning his shirt. After holding it in for a while, he squeezed out 3 words, "Get out." "What? Are you shy?" Xianxia teased, "Which part of your body haven't I seen before?" As she spoke, she began to unbutton his shirt. Yu was so frightened that she took a few steps back until she was forced into a corner. With no way out, she widened her eyes in shock and warned again, "Don't touch me." Her shocked and angry expression was like that of an innocent woman who had been violated. That can't be, right? She used to bathe him too. However, at that time, in order to train him to be independent, she had always let him wash by himself. Yu had even been a little reluctant. Later, when Wuxia bathed him, he had complained that Wuxia wasn't gentle at all and always hurt him. Xianxia was amused. Even though Yu had struggled, she still unbuttoned his shirt without a word. Yu couldn't resist at all. He allowed her to take off his clothes and carry him into the bathtub. He curled up in a corner, his whole body submerged in the water, only half of his face above the water. His vigilant eyes were on her, full of resistance. He didn't want her to bathe him. He didn't like to be touched by the opposite sex. Xianxia knew that he was shy. As she smiled, she squeezed the shower gel into the shower gel, grabbed one of his arms and started to scrub it carefully. The moment she touched him, Yu's body instantly froze like a rock and he didn't move at all. Chapter 3597. The bathroom was foggy. Gradually, Yu relaxed. His muscles were no longer as tense as before. He allowed Xianxia to rub the foam on his body. Her technique was very gentle and light. As the foam rubbed on his body, his muscles and bones relaxed involuntarily. Xianxia then applied shampoo on his hair. She was very careful and did not let any of the foam into his eyes. Yu could not help but fall into a daze for a long time because of her gentle technique. After the shower, Xianxia carried Yu onto the absorbent mat. Then, she wrapped the large bathrobe around him and wiped his body. Yu remained silent. However, he did not show any strong resistance. He was slowly accepting her. When she thought of this, Xianxia's heart was filled with warmth. She firmly believed that his memories would be erased. However, some blood ties could not be erased no matter what. She believed that Yu would definitely recover. Xianxia carried Yu into the room. However, she was not in a hurry to leave. Instead, she took out a thick stack of fairy tale books from the bedside table. In the past, Yu loved it when she read him bedtime stories. When he was not around, these fairy tale books were secretly kept by Xiao Yichen. Xianxia thought that these books had been thrown away. She was sad for a long time. Then, she went to the bookstore and bought many more fairy tale books. She placed them on the bedside table in Yu Yu's room. Every time a new fairy tale book was released, she would buy all of them. Yu Yu looked at the fairy tale books in her hands strangely. His gaze was filled with doubt. You don't remember? In the past, you loved it when Mommy read you fairy tales. Xianxia flipped to a page. The first story was Andersen's fairy tale, The Daughter of the Sea. Her fingertips gently ran over the words. For a moment, she was filled with emotions. This was also the first fairy tale that she read for Yu Yu. At that time, Yu Yu was still young. She didn't really understand the story. After she read it a few more times, she finally understood that it was a tragic story. Yu Yu lay down on the bed, and Xianxia tucked him in. Daughter of the Sea. Have you heard of it? Yu Yu blinked but did not say anything. Xianxia said again. You must not remember. I'll read it again, okay? Yu Yu slowly closed her eyes. Xianxia held the book and began to read softly. In the depths of the vast ocean, there is a kingdom of fish. The Sea King had 6 beautiful daughters, especially the youngest, who was even more beautiful than her sisters. She was kind, pure, and had a beautiful voice. They lived freely and without worries in the sea. Sometimes, their grandmother would tell them some novel stories on the sea. This filled the youngest heart with longing for the world at sea. As Xianxia read, memories of the past surfaced in her mind. It was as if she could see a 3-year-old Yu Yu hugging a pillow and sitting on the bed, looking at her longingly. Mommy, do these fish look the same as humans? No, they have the bodies of humans, but the tails of fish. Then how do they breathe in the sea? Xianxia was suddenly put in a difficult position. She immediately said, They are the spirits of the sea. They can swim and breathe freely in the sea. Chapter 3598. That's why once they reach the sea, they can't walk anymore. Are there really mermaids in this world? Xianxia pretended to be mysterious. Who knows? I'll continue. The little princess finally reached the age of 15 and was allowed to float to the surface of the sea. She looked around excitedly, wanting to take in everything. At this moment, a large ship sailed by her side. There were many people dressed in gorgeous clothes on the ship celebrating the prince's birthday. The little mermaid was immediately attracted to the handsome prince. At this moment, there was a sudden storm and the waves destroyed the ship. The people fell into the water and sank to the bottom of the sea. The mermaid risked her life and rushed into the whirlpool to save the prince. She gently kissed the prince's forehead and hid in the water, silently waiting for someone to save him. At this moment, a young lady found the prince. She called some people and saved the prince. When the story reached the part where the little mermaid wanted to turn her fishtail into legs, she found a witch and drank a magic potion. However, it was extremely painful to turn into human legs. Every step she took, she had to endure great pain. Yu Yu's heart clenched. He hugged Xianxia's arm and said sadly, Will the little mermaid die? She smiled. No, I won't. That's good. Yu Yu was relieved again. The story continued. The witch told him that if the prince forgot his parents because of love and married the little mermaid, she would obtain an immortal soul. However, if the prince married another lady, the little mermaid would die the morning before the wedding and turn into foam in the sea. The little mermaid's face was pale, but she was not afraid. As a reward, the witch cut off her tongue and took away her beautiful voice. She could no longer speak. Late at night, the little mermaid left her family and left heartbroken. When she came to the sea, she drank the potion but fainted because of the pain. When she woke up, the prince asked her questions. She could not answer because she was mute. However, she endured the pain and danced for the prince. When Yu Yu heard this, he frowned and looked very distressed. As the story went on, Yu Yu stopped talking. Especially when she heard that the prince didn't know that it was the little mermaid who saved her. He wanted to marry the princess and invited the little mermaid to dance for them. On the night before the wedding, the sisters floated to the surface of the sea. It turned out that in order to save their sister, they cut off their hair and gave them a sharp knife. As long as the little mermaid pierced the prince's chest, she could return to the sea. This was his last chance. His memories overlapped with the scene before him. Xianxia looked at Yu Yu, who was lying on the bed. Everything had changed. He lay on the bed with his eyes closed, but no one knew if he was asleep or awake. Xianxia gently stroked his forehead, closed the book, and was about to leave. When she got up, Little Bun suddenly opened his eyes and asked coldly, "Did she kill that prince?" Xianxia was stunned and turned around. Under the moonlight, Yu slowly sat up from the bed. Her cold eyes revealed a hint of curiosity. Did she use that knife to kill that prince? Xianxia shook her head. No. No. Yu said doubtfully, if she didn't kill that prince, she would have turned into foam. Chapter 3599. Xianxia returned to the bedside and caressed his cheek gently. At night, she came to the prince's room and gave him a kiss. As she spoke, she bent down and kissed Yu gently on his forehead. Yu was stunned and his eyes widened in shock. She didn't kill the prince because she didn't have her tail and couldn't return to the sea. At the prince's wedding, she endured the pain and danced. In the end, she turned into foam and disappeared forever. Yu asked, "Why? Why didn't she kill the prince? This prince is ungrateful." It was the little mermaid who saved him. He seemed to be filled with righteous indignation. When Xianxia heard this, she suddenly laughed. Yu had already immersed himself in this story and his emotions. Just like in the past when he heard this story, Yu clenched his fists and asked sadly, "If it were me, I would definitely kill the prince and return to the sea to be with my family." Because the little mermaid loves the prince very much. Even if she had to sacrifice herself, she wouldn't be willing to hurt the prince. Yu sneered. "If it were me, I wouldn't sacrifice myself for someone who doesn't love me." Xianxia was frightened by his cold gaze. The Yu of the past would not have such a cold gaze when he heard this story. This was a pair of eyes that were filled with hostility. There was a murderous aura that the Yu of the past would not have. Xianxia hugged him tightly, feeling uneasy. Yu, don't be like this." Yu was hugged by her warm embrace. For a moment, his heart calmed down. Not everything can be solved by killing. Xianxia said again, "You weren't like this in the past." Yu suddenly pushed her away and said expressionlessly, "In this world, the weak are prey to the strong. Only by becoming strong enough can one's own interests not be infringed upon." Xianxia was stunned. She suddenly remembered what Yu had said to her in the past. Only by becoming stronger can you protect the people you want to protect. "Mommy, I want to protect you, so I must become strong. That way, no one can hurt you." Yu, why do you want to become stronger now?" Yu could not help but stare blankly. This question stumped him. That was right. What was he doing now? What was the purpose of him becoming so powerful? Yu's gaze suddenly fell on her hand. In the past, Yu wanted to become stronger because he wanted to protect Xianxia. But now, he had lost his goal and didn't know where to go. He said in a daze, "Only by being strong can one not be reduced to being dominated by others." Yes. In this world, the weak were prey to the strong. She didn't deny that. To become strong, one had to be built on the pain of the weak. She also couldn't deny that. However, if the strong became apathetic, cold and heartless, then what was the meaning of life for such a strong person? "I'm tired." Yu turned away and did not look at her. "I want to sleep." Xianxia furrowed her brows and did not say anything more until he lay down. She covered him with the blanket and left quietly. However, lying on the bed, Yu tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. When he said that he was tired and wanted to sleep, it was just an excuse. Chapter 3600. It was a mess for no reason. Her embrace was very warm and made him yearn for it. He actually couldn't help but want to hug her back tightly. It was just that this warmth made him feel at a loss, lost, and confused. Why did he rely on this warmth? She kept telling him how he used to be and how he used to be. But was there really a past? Yu suddenly felt a splitting headache. It was so painful, as if a pair of hands were tearing his head apart. Yu clutched his head in pain and his body curled up involuntarily. He was drenched in cold sweat. It was only at dawn that his headache eased a little. He wrapped himself in the blanket tiredly and fell asleep. When he woke up, it was already the afternoon of the next day. He slowly pushed open the door and saw Xianxia sitting on the sofa in the living room. She was humming softly as she knitted a small glove. On the floor, Yueyao was sitting on the blanket, hugging a teething stick and chewing on it. When she heard footsteps coming out of the room, Yao looked up. She was the first to notice Yu. Seeing him standing at the door, she immediately got up from the floor with her butt sticking out. She gripped the teething stick tightly and walked towards him step by step. "Brother!" She hobbled over to him. She loosened her grip and the teething stick fell to the floor. Xianxia heard the sound of something falling. She looked up and looked at Yu. She put the glove aside and said, Yu, you're awake?" Yu didn't say a word. He only lowered his head and looked at Yao. Yao had a pair of big eyes just like him. They were very attractive. Especially those curly eyelashes. When she blinked, they fluttered like the wings of a butterfly and were very charming. Yao suddenly opened her arms. Her cherry lips opened and closed and she said in a soft and tender voice, "Brother, hug." This glutinous rice ball wanted brother to hug her. The little fellow was very forgetful. She had completely forgotten about Yu's indifference towards her when she was asking for a hug. Xianxia froze for a moment and looked nervously at Yu. However, she saw that his attitude was no longer as cold as before. At least when Yao walked towards him, he no longer dodged. "Big brother, hug me." Yao stretched out her arms again and stood on her tiptoes. However, she lost her balance and fell on her butt. From start to finish, Yu looked at her coldly and did not help her up. Yao fell, but she did not cry in a delicate manner. She only furrowed her delicate brows, clearly aggrieved. She got up from the ground on all fours and raised her head to look at Yu, only to see that he was still cold and indifferent. For a moment, she was extremely sad. Her little mouth pouted high, and she looked like a storm was coming. Xianxia knew from this that she was going to cry. She quickly stood up and was about to walk over to carry Yao when Yu suddenly bent down and gently carried Yao. He was still a little unfamiliar with the way he carried his sister. He didn't even know how to use his arms to support her butt. Yao was delighted to see him carry her. She hugged him tightly like a koala bear and didn't want to let go. She leaned on his shoulder affectionately and broke into a smile. Chapter 36:01. For some reason, Yao was inexplicably close to Yu. This surprised Xianxia a little. After all, a child's memory was limited. Even before this, Yu was the closest to her and doted on her the most. She liked to hug her every day, hold her phone, and take pictures of Yao non-stop like an idiot. However, at that time, Yao was incomparably cold to Yu. However, Yu had left for more than a year. Yao shouldn't have remembered. Yao hugged Yu like a koala. Her little head rested on Yu's shoulder, looking extremely satisfied. Xianxia teased her and said, "Yao, where's Xianxia?" She thought that Yao had mistaken Yu for Xianxia. When Yao finally started babbling, Xianxia taught her to say her name. Yao also learned a skill, which was to recognize the names of all the family members, except for Yu. When Xianxia asked, "Where's Xianxia?" Yao would often point at Xianxia and ask, "Where's Muyajia?" She could also recognize the direction and point at Muyajia. Xianxia didn't specially teach her Yu's name. This name had become an unspeakable pain in her heart. Whether it was Muyajia or Gongjie, they would avoid it as much as possible. Hence, Yao didn't know Yu's name. However, Yu and Xianxia looked very similar, so they might have been confused. "Where's Xianxia?" When Yao heard Xianxia say Xianxia's name, he couldn't help but look around. However, he didn't see Xianxia, so he asked hesitantly, "Where's Xianxia?" Xianxia was stunned. If Yao mistook Yu for Xianxia, she would definitely point at Yu. However, it did not. Xianxia would never have thought that after more than a year, Yao actually remembered Yu's appearance and could even differentiate Yu from Xianxia. When Yu heard Xianxia's question, he asked suspiciously, "Who's Xianxia?" Xianxia said gently, "Xianxia is your older brother. You're twins and look exactly the same. No one can tell the difference. Other than your family members, I didn't expect Yao to be able to differentiate between you and Xianxia." After a pause, Xianxia said sadly, "After all, when Yao was not even a year old, you got into trouble." When Yu heard this, his thoughts were a little confused. "I have an older brother?" Yu looked a little surprised. Xianxia immediately took out a photo. It was a family photo and she showed it to Yu. Yu Yu looked at the photo. It was a family photo. Xianxia was sitting with Yue Yao in her arms. Two children who looked exactly like him were standing on both sides. It was sunset. Of the two children, one had a gentle smile while the other had a sunny smile. Their eyebrows and eyes were exactly the same, except for a slight difference in height. Even he could not tell which child was his own. This was the first time he saw a family photo like this after he returned to the Mu family. At first glance, it was a huge shock. Xianxia had always said that he was her son and her baby. Yu Yu had always been suspicious. The reason why he was not so resistant and close to her now was not because he believed that he was her son. It was because he did not know why he was not so resistant and close to her. However, when he saw this photo, Yu Yu could not help but wonder if what she said was true. Was he really her family? Was that possible? Chapter 3602. Alice had instilled memories in him. He was the son of the Gong family and had always been in poor health, so he had been receiving physiotherapy on Ashland Island. He didn't know who his mother was, nor did he know who his siblings were. He only knew that he had an uncle called Gong Jie. However, even Gong Jie told him that his real name was not Mu Yaja. His real name was Yun Tianyu, and he was the son of Mu Yaja and Xianxia. He could not digest this information for a while. It was complete nonsense. He had been in the Gong family all this time and did not have any memories of Mu Yaja, Xianxia, and even Xiao Yichen. It was just that the photo made his thoughts chaotic for a moment. Yu Yu lowered his head to look at Yue Yao, who was in his arms. Yue Yao also looked up at him. Seeing him staring at him, the little guy reached out his soft hands and gently patted his face. It was so fun. Yu Yu did not find it annoying though. Her scratches did not hurt much, and her nails were neatly trimmed. Hence, when she pinched herself, it did not hurt or itch. Yu Yu was no longer as resistant to this child as before. He avoided her as if she were a snake or a scorpion. This change made Xianxia feel relieved. Did he quickly improve on the day he regained his memories? During dinner, Xianxia personally cooked. When Gong Jie and Mu Yaja returned, the dishes were already on the table. What surprised them was not that Xianxia cooked for the first time, but that they saw Yu Yu sitting at the dining table with Yue Yao sitting on the baby stool and playing with a toy. He lazily propped his chin on his hand and quietly watched her play with the toy. This guy actually walked out of his room. This was a miracle. After returning to the Mu family for such a long time, he had always locked himself in his room. He never came out of his room, never letting the sun out. Why did he come out now? Gong Jie and Mu Yaja looked at each other but did not show too much of a shock, lest they startled him. As usual, they sat down at the dining table. Yu Yu did not look at them and continued to stare at Yue Yao. Gong Jie had his own thoughts. Yu Yu, this damn siscon. Why was he always staring at Yue Yao? Was uncle not good looking? Ha! After being back for so many days, this brat had only glanced at him lightly when he smashed the bowl of noodles that he had brought out. He had not even looked at him directly. Gong's heart. Mu Yaja and Gong Jie stared at Yu Yu fiercely and complained in their hearts. The two of them were not as good-looking as Yue Yao, right? Xianxia walked out with rice and saw that Gong Jie and Mu Yaja had returned. The two of them sat opposite Yu Yu and the three of them formed a strange triangle. Her lips twitched as she placed the rice on the table. Let's eat. Xianxia placed the rice noodles in front of Yue Yao and tied a napkin around her before sitting down beside her. They started eating. Yu Yu was stunned and did not move his chopsticks. When they were on Ashland Island, he had always eaten alone. He was used to having a quiet dining table and had never experienced this before. There were so many people sitting around the table and eating, but he did not feel uncomfortable at all. What are you waiting for? Xianxia picked up a grilled chicken wing for him and said, "Eat it while it's hot." Yu Yu picked up his chopsticks and started eating. Chapter 3603. Yu Yu finally raised his eyes to look at him. It was just that this glance was cold and emotionless, and then he pushed the vegetables away in disgust. He pushed them away. He had thought that he would just push them away, but unexpectedly, Yu Yu picked up the vegetables and threw them into the small plate used for throwing the bones. Gong Jie's heart shattered with a smack. Mu Yaja muttered, "Yu Yu doesn't like vegetables." Hence, he also picked up a drumstick and put it in his bowl. Yu Yu didn't even look at it. He used his chopsticks and placed the drumstick on the table. Then, He used his chopsticks to pick up the chicken wing that Yun Shirshir had given him and started eating. Mu Yaja was speechless. Gong Jie tried to hold back his laughter until his stomach hurt. He lowered his voice and said, "Brother-in-law, he doesn't want to eat the drumstick you gave him. Yu just doesn't like you, haha." Mu Yaja turned around and smiled at him elegantly. Then, he picked up a piece of red braised pork and stuffed it into his mouth. "Shut up and eat." Gong Jie couldn't speak with a piece of red braised pork stuffed into his mouth. He stared blankly at Mu Yaja as he calmly picked up his bowl and started eating. Yu finished the drumstick in his bowl and stopped eating. Yun Shirshir saw this and picked up some vegetables for him. Yu hesitated for a while and ate the vegetables as well. Yao thought that it was fun. She suddenly scooped up some rice noodles with a spoon. She raised her little hand and stretched it in front of Yu, wanting to feed him. Yao wasn't very good at using the spoon. She held the spoon in a reverse grip and the rice noodles dripped onto the table. Yu looked at her in surprise, only to hear Yao mumble, "Okay, eat." Yun Shirshir said, "Yao is feeding you." Yu was stunned for a few seconds. She stretched out her head and took the rice noodles that Yao handed her. The sticky rice noodles didn't have any extra seasoning. It was light, but there was a rich milky fragrance. Yu took a bite. When Yao saw this, he was extremely excited. He danced around and scooped up another bite. His little hand held the spoon with great effort and raised it to his mouth. Yu was a little conflicted. This rice noodle was not particularly delicious. It was a formula for babies, so it was tasteless. However, Yao insisted on feeding him. He didn't know if it was because he found it fun or something else. Yu had no choice but to take another bite. Yao turned his head and smiled at Yun Shirshir as if he was presenting a treasure. He revealed his cute little front teeth and said, "Mommy, brother is eating." Yun Shirshir smiled and coaxed, "Okay. Yao eat too." "No, I want to feed. Brother." As Yao spoke, she fed Yu mouthful by mouthful. After that, Yu was full just by eating the rice noodles. Yun Shirshir was holding back her laughter. She was a little surprised that Yu didn't show any resistance to Yao's closeness. Even when Yao fed him, Yu didn't reject it. Opposite them, the two men who had been ignored from the start to the end were frowning. Gong Jie didn't believe it and picked up another wing root. Yu didn't even look at it and removed it. There was nothing to say. Gong Jie couldn't take it anymore and protested, "What's the difference between the wing root I picked up and the one your mommy picked up?" "This was the love of an uncle." Yu said coldly, "It's dirty. There's saliva. It's not hygienic." Gong Jie was puzzled. Didn't Yun Shirshir's chopsticks have saliva on them? Yao's spoon was full of saliva. Why didn't he dislike it? Chapter 3604. After dinner, Yu was about to go back to his room when Gong Jie suddenly put his arm around his shoulder and said, "What are you doing in your room every day? Cultivating?" Yu slapped his hand away and glared at him as if to warn him, "Don't touch me." "Why are you glaring at me?" Gong Jie said confidently, "I'm doing this for your own good. If you weren't my biological nephew, I wouldn't have anything to do with you lying in your room until your limbs degenerate." Yun Shirshir added, "That's right, Yu. You can't stay in your room every day. You have to go out for a walk once in a while." When Mu Yaja heard this, he suddenly said to Yun Shirshir, "Why don't we take him out for a walk? Who knows, it might be good for him to recover his memory." Yun Shirshir felt that this made sense. Gong Jie also said, "I heard that there's an open-air music festival at Manha Square tonight. It starts at 8 p.m. Why don't we go to the music festival?" Yun Shirshir agreed readily. Gong Jie was about to carry Yao when Yun Shirshir immediately said, "Yao can't go. It's too noisy at an open-air music festival. Yao will cry." Then, what about Yao? Although there was a nanny, Yao couldn't be left alone. No one was assured. Mu Yaja said matter-of-factly, "As his uncle, you should stay and take care of Yao." When Gong Jie heard this, he couldn't take it anymore. "No way. Why should I?" He hooked his arm around Mu Yaja's shoulder and said disdainfully, "Don't think I don't know what you're thinking. You must be thinking of using the music festival to communicate with Yu. No way, I want to go too." What's wrong with the three of us communicating? Hey, are you being xenophobic? Gong Jie was not convinced and said, I also want to communicate with my nephew. Mu Yaja said coldly, your surname is Gong, not Mu. You and I are not family. Gong Jie, Yun Shishir added. Shao Jie, you can stay at home and take care of Yue Yao. Mu Yaja continued, well, you don't like Yue Yao very much. Now, no one is fighting with you for a hug. Be good. After that, Mu Yaja picked up Yu Yu and left with Yun Shishir. Gong Jie was left standing alone in the living room, unable to express his bitterness. He didn't know if he should curse her or not. Was he being treated as a babysitter? Just as Gong Jie was about to explode, Yue Yao suddenly walked to his side, squatted down, and secretly stuffed a toy into his trousers. Ha ha ha. Yue Yao let out a string of bell-like laughter. She grabbed his trousers and tugged. Gong Jie lowered his head and saw that she was having fun playing with his trousers. His eyes couldn't help but soften. He immediately squatted down and pulled her into his arms. Yue Yao, Uncle will accompany you at home, okay? Yue Yao suddenly raised her chubby little paw and slapped his face. Gong Jie's face darkened. He grabbed her little paw and said, you're not allowed to hit Uncle's face. Yue Yao slapped his face again. Gong Jie frowned unhappily. However, when he saw Yue Yao's heartless smile, which made him want to dote on her, he suddenly gave in. He curved his lips and gently kissed her cheek. Yue Yao, be good. Daddy and Mommy don't want you, but Uncle wants you. Yue Yao suddenly pinched his cheek and pulled it until it was deformed. She was amused by his distorted handsome face and couldn't stop laughing. It was only half an hour's drive from Manha Square. Chapter 3605. Yu Yu let her hug him obediently. He looked out of the window. The passing scenery seemed familiar. Was this the place where he used to live? Especially when they passed by the park and the bridge across the river. Yun Shishir saw that he was staring at the bridge and immediately said, Yu Yu, do you still remember? We used to set off fireworks here during the Lunar New Year. Fireworks? Yeah. Yun Shishir continued. At that time, you were fighting to set off fireworks. I didn't let you do it in the past, so you felt that it was a novelty and wanted to light your own fireworks. I was a little scared. Yu Yu stared at the bridge curiously. Through the window, he could see many people standing under the bridge, sitting on long benches or flying kites. The kites were luminous and many of them were bobbing in the wind. He couldn't help but be entranced by the sight. Mu Yaja steered the kite as he looked at Yu Yu through the rearview mirror. His heart was filled with emotions. Yu Yu had disappeared for a year and everyone was thinking about him. Although no one gave up easily, as time passed, the hope in their hearts gradually disappeared without a trace. However, no one dared to give up. Because if they gave up, it would mean that in their hearts, Yu Yu was really dead. At that time, the search became their motivation to persevere. When Yu Yu really came back, Mu Yaja didn't show it on his face, but in fact, he was ecstatic. His son was still alive. He had come back alive. However, as a father, he had to maintain his composure. Hence, he didn't show it on his face. However, his care and patience for Yu Yu was no less than Yun Shishir's. Even if Yu Yu didn't acknowledge him and didn't remember him, it didn't matter. Yu Yu would always be Mu Yaja's son. This was a fact that even the heavens couldn't change. Many people gathered in Manha Square. The weather was perfect for the open-air music festival. There was no rain. Everyone gathered in the square. At a glance, the square was filled with people. Among the crowd, there were people constantly waving their light sticks, forming a sea of stars. There were too many people, probably in the tens of thousands. With so many people it was too dangerous. If there was any commotion, a stampede could easily occur. Yun Shishir was a little worried. She had always had a lot of concerns. After all, women were more meticulous. Moreover, there were many reports on the news that said that in crowded places, if it wasn't a stampede, it was a crush, or it was a fall and bruise. With so many people around, it was inevitable. Therefore, she hugged Yu Yu even tighter. Why are there so many people? Yun Shishir muttered and looked around. They had arrived relatively early, but because they arrived early, the crowd had blocked the only exit. For a moment, they could not advance or retreat. People kept pushing and shoving, trying to get to the front, the closest place to the stage. There were too many people. If she had known that there would be so many people, Xianxia wouldn't have come. However, since she was already here, she might as well make the best of it. Xianxia hugged Yu. Even so, it was still difficult for Yu to see the stage. However, he wasn't interested. He didn't like places with too many people, and he didn't like places that were too noisy. It was irritating. It was tiring. Chapter 3606. Xianxia, however, said, "No, it's too dangerous. There are so many people squeezing around. If you accidentally fall, you might hit your head." Wuxia felt that it made sense. Hence, he took Yu from Xianxia's arms, worried that she would be too tired to carry him. Yu was initially a little resistant in his arms and struggled a little. Wuxia said to him, "You're so heavy. Mommy's arms will get tired if I carry you all the time. Let Daddy carry you for a while, okay?" When Yu heard this, he didn't show any signs of resistance. He just turned his face away and refused to look at him. Obviously, he didn't appreciate it. However, he didn't refuse or resist again. Wuxia was already satisfied. On the stage, the band went on stage one after another to perform the songs. The atmosphere was instantly ignited. Everyone waved the light sticks in their hands and immersed themselves in the moving music. Yu was tone-deaf and wasn't particularly interested in music. However, when the third song started playing, it was an English song that strangely captured his attention. "Iman harakani bodasi my m here. Can anyone see mekanani body help? Can anyone help me? Iman hiria prisoner of Astorim here, a sinner of history. Cantio heremical. Can you hear me yelling? Ariuing to Jetmano, will you take me away immediately? I've been waiting for you to rescue me. You must come and save me. Iman hearing calling up Idakanther here. I'm shouting loudly, but no one can hear me. Can any body help? Can anyone help me? I'm hysterical until I break down. I'm lost in the cage. Tell me there's still hope. Is there anyone outside listening?" This was an English song. The meaning of the lyrics was about a lost person, trapped in the sad memories of the past, waiting to be redeemed and saved. However, this song actually made Yu feel an indescribable sadness in his heart. He gently closed his eyes. In the darkness, he could vaguely see a cage in the darkness where there was no light. A child who looked exactly like him was holding on to the cage tightly and shouting something. But he couldn't hear anything. He couldn't hear anything at all. In his ears, there was only the sound of music and the noise of people buzzing. The youth in the cage seemed to have seen him. He shook the iron bars and shouted crazily, "Let me out of here!" Yu furrowed his brows and was a little puzzled. "Who are you? Let me out. I don't want to be here." The youth gripped the iron bars tightly and looked desperate. "I don't want to be here alone. Don't lock me up here alone." Between the iron bars, the youth's delicate face was pale. "Mommy, Daddy. Can you hear me? Mommy. Yu. Yu?" A series of urgent calls finally woke him up. When he woke up again, he was in Wuxia's arms. He seemed to have fainted. Wuxia and Xianxia were scared out of their wits. They kept patting his face until he finally woke up. However, when he opened his eyes, a line of tears suddenly fell from the corner of his eyes. Xianxia was shocked to see his tears. Just as she was about to caress his face, she saw a helpless look on the child's face. "Mommy, Mommy!" he called her anxiously and frowned slightly. Chapter 3607. Xianxia was so excited and happy that he had taken the initiative to call her. For a moment, she was caught off guard. Just as she was about to hug him, the child in her arms suddenly pounced on her and hugged her tightly. His little hands hugged her tighter and tighter. "Mommy. Mommy. Yu missed you so much." Wuxia was also stunned. Xianxia was also stunned. That familiar voice was enough to make her heart burn. Xianxia hugged him even tighter in surprise. "Yu, you're back. Is that you? Yu." Xianxia had told her about Yu's situation. Yu had dual personalities. One was the son of light, and the other was the son of darkness. One side was pure and innocent, while the other side was evil and cruel. Xianxia said that Yu's memory had been sealed, but his first personality had been killed by his second personality. Perhaps his memory could be recovered, but the innocent and kind Yu of the past might not be able to come back. When Xianxia first heard about this, she was shocked and flustered. She didn't know anything about dual personalities, nor did she know anything about the dark side. Her Yu was so pure and innocent. How could he be so cruel and cruel? But after that, she kept reading up on all kinds of information about dissociative identity disorder and dual personalities. There had always been many conflicts in the field of dissociative identity disorder. After all, the research in this field wasn't very deep. There weren't many patients with dissociative identity disorder in the world. However, some said that the first personality wouldn't be taken over by the other personalities. Some said that not only would the first personality be killed and taken over, but once another personality took over the body, the person would never be able to come back. Xianxia was also mentally prepared that Yu of the past would never be able to come back. Even though Yu had changed and had become cold and reclusive, she didn't dare to ask for more if he could come back alive. As long as Yu was safe and by her side, she would do her best to take good care of him. Even if the Yu of the past couldn't come back to her side, she didn't care. But in her heart, she still hoped for a miracle to happen. Even though this process might be more difficult than carrying a child for 10 months, she wasn't afraid. She also hoped that the Yu of the past could come back to her side. Yu, are you back? Xianxia. You. She was so excited that she hugged Yu tightly and burst out in tears. However, the crying of the child in her arms gradually stopped until it was dead silent and did not make a single sound. You too, Yu. You, oh, you. You, oh. Oh, you, oh. Of you, oh. Why are you crying? Yu asked. Suddenly, he frowned and touched the corners of his eyes with his fingers. What he touched were the dried tears. Why was he crying too? Yu frowned strangely and wiped the tears away. Xianxia looked at him nervously and didn't move. She tried calling out to him carefully. Yu. Yu looked at her coldly. He didn't respond or reject her. Just like before, his face was cold and emotionless. Xianxia's heart sank to the bottom of the abyss. Yu had disappeared again. Chapter 3608. How could this be? Yu. She thought that Yu was really back. She really thought that the gentle Yu from the past was back. But in the blink of an eye, he resumed his cold demeanor. How could this be? Xianxia said anxiously, "Just now it was Yu," she cried to Wuxia, her heart aching. "Just now, I heard Yu calling me Mommy." Wuxia hugged Xianxia's shoulders and kissed her forehead. Sure, don't be like this. Don't be anxious. Didn't we agree to take it slow?" Xianxia turned around and looked at the child in her arms. Suddenly she pleaded, "Please, let Yu come back, please. I want to see Yu. I want to see Yu." She didn't know what nonsense she was spouting. But her mind was in a mess. The only thing she could realize was that there seemed to be two souls residing in this child's body. One was the Yu from the past. The other was the Yu who had been given the name Gong Fan. She missed Yu. She wanted to see that Yu again and hear him call her Mommy. She wanted that Yu to come back. All this while, she had been waiting patiently. But her hope had been dashed again. Her disappointed expression had undoubtedly agitated the child. The child looked at her coldly and finally said, "I'm not Yu." "Then let Yu come back, please." She lowered her posture to the lowest possible level, and was practically begging him with an incomparably pleading tone. The child suddenly felt frustrated. Yu. Hearing this name that didn't belong to him every day, his ears were about to grow calluses. So, this woman was being so gentle to him because she wanted to awaken that Yu? What she needed was Yu. Whether it was Xianxia, Wuxia, or Yueyao. What they needed was Yu, not him. What was laughable was that he was actually moved by her gentleness. He actually instinctively yearned for this warmth and tenderness. Instinctively, he wanted to rely on her, wanted to hug her. However, from the beginning to the end, he was treated as another Yu. What she needed, what she loved, and what she missed, was never him. All this while he had been needed, cared for and loved. It was all because they wanted to find the shadow of Yu in him. It was as if this body had always belonged to Yu, and he had been treated as an invader, occupying this body as an enemy. He had never been needed, or even rejected by them. Was he hated? Or rejected? He also wanted to try his best to adapt to the role of Yu Yu. But he wasn't Yu Yu. So, stop calling him Yu Yu. The child was anxious and frustrated. He pushed her away forcefully. I've said it before. I'm not Yu Yu. Xianxia was pushed to the ground and her eyes were filled with shock. Wuxia also looked at him in disbelief. He didn't expect him to revert back to that cold and aloof self when he had just returned to the Mu family. The child was obviously losing control of his emotions. He stood up and his body swayed slightly. The child tried his best to stabilize himself and turned to look at Xianxia. He said in disappointment and anger, "Don't call me that again. I'm not Yu Yu, I'm not Yu Yu." Chapter 3609. Xianxia was heartbroken when she heard that. She immediately said, "Yu Yu, don't say such silly things. How are you not Yu Yu? You are. You are. Enough." Yu Yu covered his ears uncontrollably and said in despair, "Don't call me that again." After he said that, he turned around and his slender figure disappeared into the bustling crowd. "Yu Yu." Xianxia chased after him anxiously. However, it was too crowded. Yu Yu was not tall and was very skinny. He managed to squeeze through the crowd. However, she was blocked by the crowd. "What should we do?" Wuxia held her hand and comforted her. "Don't worry." He held her hand and followed the direction in which Yu Yu had left. They pushed through the crowd and chased after him. "Yu Yu! Yu Yu!" The voices were still ringing in his ears. Yu Yu closed his eyes tightly. His fragile body seemed to be on the verge of collapsing in the crowd. "Don't call me that again. Don't." He finally calmed down. However, when he looked around, he was surrounded by the crowd. On the stage, rock music was playing intensely. The crowd was also excited by the explosive rhythm. Some of them sang loudly along with the music. Some of them screamed hysterically. Yu Yu felt a little dizzy. He felt that the noise was getting further and further away. All he could hear was the buzzing of the crowd. "Excuse me." Someone rushed over and pushed through the crowd. When he saw Yu Yu in front of him, he pushed him hard. Yu Yu lost his balance and almost fell. There were so many people. If he fell, he would definitely be stepped on mercilessly by the crowd. Just as he was about to fall, an arm suddenly supported his center of gravity. "Are you okay?" A woman's gentle voice was heard. Yu Yu frowned. He was a little surprised. Who was it? Was it her? Xianxia? When he raised his head, he saw a woman's face that he didn't recognize. The woman in front of him was delicate and pretty. Her every movement gave off a heroic aura that ordinary women did not have. Yu Yu narrowed his eyes and sized her up. "You are." Chuho looked at the child in front of him. He suddenly felt that he looked familiar, but he could not remember where he had seen him before. Behind her, Gu Jinglian walked over with baby Chu in his arms. Lin Shi followed beside him and was puzzled to see Chu he grabbing a child's arm. Gu Jinglian's handsome face darkened when he saw the child's face clearly. "It's you." Yu Yu turned to look at the man, and his eyes instantly turned gloomy. Gu. When enemies met enemies, and Yu Gu Jinglian's face turned pale when he saw Yu Yu. Chu Ho was surprised when he saw his expression. "What's wrong? Do you know this child?" The man snorted coldly and said in an unfriendly tone, "I don't just know him." He also had a deep hatred. He still had a score to settle with this child. Yu Yu took a step back cautiously. A tiger would be bullied by a dog. This was not Hurricane, and he was alone. He would not gain anything if he went head-to-head with Gu Jinglian. Just as he was about to leave, Gu Jinglian grabbed him by the collar and lifted him up. "Why are you running?" Chapter 3610. He's just a child. "You, child?" Gu Jinglian sneered. "He's not an ordinary child." He turned his head and fixed his gaze on Yu Yu's face. His eyes were cold. "He's from the Gong family, Gong Fan from the Hurricane group." "He's not an ordinary child." Gong Fan. Hearing this name, Chu Ho's face also showed a surprised expression. Gong Fan. That was the child who had used her and Xiao Bao as a hostage to force Gu Jinglian to sign the agreement to cede Worth to him. How could he be so young? She looked so soft and squishy. She couldn't tell how vicious and merciless this child was. Yu Yu was very calm. He narrowed his eyes and said calmly, "Gu Jinglian, I dare you to touch me." Before he could finish speaking, Gu Jinglian flicked his finger hard on the man's forehead with a loud and crisp sound. Yu Yu felt a concussion in his head and felt dizzy for a moment. He felt that his forehead was about to be shattered by this flick of his finger. Gu Jinglian said coldly, "This is my territory in Beijing. You asked me if I dare to touch you. What do you think?" Yu Yu was not afraid at all. He raised his leg and kicked him in his weakest spot. This move was ruthless, but Gu Jinglian had expected it and dodged in time. This child was really ruthless. Was this kick going to end his lineage? Gu Jinglian would not let him off so easily. He kicked him in the butt. Yu Yu, who had nowhere to hide, took the full brunt of the kick. He frowned in pain, but he did not show it on his face and maintained his composure. "Gu Jinglian, you..." Before he could finish, Gu Jinglian pinched his face and pulled hard. Rumor has it that the ruthless successor of the Hurricane Group, Gong Fan, is just so without those mercenaries and bodyguards. However, this little guy was weak, yet he was still so arrogant. Who was he trying to show off to? Showing off in his territory? Was he courting death? In a hotel room next to the square, a gray-haired middle-aged man sat on the windowsill with a bottle of wine in his hand. He was drunk and on the verge of collapsing. If it weren't for the guardrails outside the windows of the room, he would have lost his balance and fallen. He picked up the wine bottle and took a big gulp. When he opened his eyes again, there was a terrifying murderous intent in them. In the square, the crowd was bustling with noise. The crowd danced to the music, getting high. However, the livelier the crowd was, the more the man felt indignant. Just last month, he was fired by the company. Half of his life, he worked hard for the company, but all he got in return was a letter of dismissal. He lost his job, and his wife left him with their child. Just a few days ago, he saw his wife walking on the street with another strange man. They looked so sweet. Only then did he suspect that his wife had betrayed him. For so many years, he had suffered untold hardships. In order to support his family, he had been constantly on the move every day. In order to support his family, he had almost exhausted all his energy. In the end, what did he get in return? In exchange, he was chased away by the company and betrayed by his wife. Even his son refused to meet him. He had wanted to visit him several times, but his son avoided him. He even said that he would never acknowledge him as his father. What did he do wrong? Chapter 36:11. He looked down at the crowd in the square. Every single one of them was so happy. He then looked at himself. He was like an orphan who was abandoned by the world. Why did the world only give him endless despair when the others were so happy? The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was unfair. Since the world had abandoned him, then don't blame him for taking revenge on the world. The man finished his glass of white wine in one gulp and took out an AK-47 from under the windowsill. He swayed as he crouched beside the windowsill. He held the gun and loaded it clumsily. Then, he aimed the gun at the crowd and slowly pulled the trigger. He was already drunk. However, he did not need to aim in front of so many people. Every single one of them was worth it. Even if he died, he would not have lived in vain with so many people accompanying him to the grave. Suddenly, the man laughed arrogantly. Da 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 da. He pulled the trigger and fired wildly at the crowd. In the square, Gu Jinglian suddenly heard gunshots. He looked towards the direction of the sound. The square was too big, and the music on the stage was still loud. Therefore, he could not tell where the gunshots came from. Gunshots? Why were there gunshots? He could not have heard wrongly. Those were gunshots. Chu Ho also heard the gunshots that were almost drowned out by the noise. Based on the sound, it should be an AK-47. Someone was shooting at the crowd. Some of the people in the square suddenly screamed in fear. However, these screams were drowned out by the cheering crowd. The singer on the stage still did not realize what was going on. He was still sweating profusely as he held the microphone and performed with all his might. Most of the people in the crowd did not realize that the Grim Reaper was quietly approaching. Therefore, everyone was immersed in the music. The sound manipulator also realized that something was wrong. He received a radio message saying that someone was shooting at the crowd and asked for the music to be stopped immediately. The sound manipulator immediately stopped the music. The staff went on stage and covered the singer as he left the stage. The music suddenly stopped. Da-da-da. Gunshots were heard not far away. It was very obvious. It's gunshots. What's going on? Ah, run. It's a terrorist attack. Someone is shooting at the crowd. Run. Some people were hit by bullets. Some bullets pierced through their heads, some pierced through their shoulders, and some pierced through their chests. For a moment, the huge square was shrouded in blood and darkness. Seeing that their companions were injured, many people were so frightened that they screamed and cried. Help! Someone's injured. Call an ambulance. However, at this time, most people were focused on running for their lives. How could they care about others? The crowd frantically rushed towards the exit. Many people who were shot and fell to the ground were once again trampled by the frenzied crowd. Some who were still breathing were directly trampled to death. Some were running for their lives, while others were crying. For a moment, the scene was chaotic and chaotic. Yu Yu's eyes flashed with astonishment when he heard the gunshot, too. Someone opened fire? Chu Ho turned to look at Gu Jinglian. Get out of here. She immediately crouched down and carried Yu Yu. Gu Jinglian carried Xiao Bao and held Lin Shi's hand as they ran towards the exit of the square. Crouch down. Gu Jinglian ordered Chu Ho. Chapter 36:12. At this moment, Yu Yu suddenly thought of Yun Shirshir. She and Mu Yaja were still at the square. No. They were in danger. Yu Yu started to struggle. Let go of me. Gu Jinglian said angrily. Are you crazy? Do you want to die? Let go of me. Yu Yu said to Chu Ho. I want to go back. Chu Ho did not allow him to struggle and hugged him even tighter. It's too dangerous to go back. Quickly leave this place. Yu Yu said coldly. I don't need you to care about me. Let go of me. Let go. Impossible. Chu Ho had a strong sense of justice. No matter what, Yu Yu was just a child. She could not leave a child in such a dangerous place. Yu Yu grabbed her collar tightly. I said let go of me. You don't have to be responsible for my life or death. As he said that, he kicked Chu Ho hard. Chu Ho felt the pain and almost fell down. This was a rare opportunity. Yu Yu broke free from her grip and ran towards the crowd after regaining his senses. Chu Ho turned around in shock. She could not believe it. Usually, a child in this situation, like Xiao Bao, would have panicked and run away. He would be so scared that he would hide in an adult's arms and tremble in fear. Even someone as calm as Lin Shi would obediently hold Gu Jinglian's hand and go with the flow. However, this child insisted on walking into the crowd. Did he not know that the gunman was lying in ambush in some corner and was shooting randomly at the crowd? The more people there were, the more dangerous it was. There was a possibility of being shot at any time. Moreover, bullets did not have eyes. No one knew how many bullets the shooter had in his hands. In such a big square, there were so many people. Everyone was a live target. It was obvious that this was a terrorist attack. There was no premeditated plan or target. It was purely for venting and revenge. Going back would be suicide. Gu Jinglian said coldly. Don't bother about him. No one could stop a person who wanted to die. When he returned to the crowd, Yu Yu scanned the crowd with his eyes. However, his height was limited. Just maintaining the center of the crowd and not being knocked down by the people running away in a panic was already exhausting. He looked around anxiously as he avoided the crowd. Just as he was about to shout, "Mom!" his voice stopped abruptly. In his subjective consciousness, he was unwilling to be called this name. But now if he didn't call them that, how would he find them and meet up with them? Where are they? Are they still in the square? No way. They must be looking for him everywhere. They must still be here. Yu Yu couldn't care less anymore. She shouted at the top of her lungs. Mommy! Daddy! Where are you? He was like a small boat, desperately going against the flow of people, running towards the center of the square. Mommy! Daddy! He turned around and searched every face. Suddenly, he saw a familiar figure. He rushed forward and grabbed the hem of that person's shirt. Mommy! The woman turned around, but her face was covered in blood. She pushed his hand away almost instantly and ran towards the exit, following the flow of people. It wasn't her. Then where could she be? Yu Yu was even more flustered. He continued to go against the flow of people. Mommy. Mommy. Gradually, his voice sounded like he was about to cry. He looked around helplessly. The lights on the stage were off. The square was plunged into a deathly silence. Chapter 36:13. Mommy. Yu kept searching in the crowd. He did not dare to look in one direction as he was afraid that he would miss something. However, just as he was looking deeper into the crowd, he heard gunshots. Not far away, the gunmen were still hiding in the dark and kept shooting at the crowd. Swoosh! Yu felt the bullet graze his hair. In the next second, an endless amount of hot blood suddenly splashed onto his face. The bullet mercilessly pierced the neck of a woman beside him. The woman fell to the ground. Yu was standing beside her. His warm body pressed her under him. Ah! Yu was shocked. He felt the world spinning around him. He could only feel a heavy body pressing on top of him. He tried to push her away, but the woman's body gradually turned cold. When he pushed her, her head flipped over, revealing a pair of empty and withered eyes. Because it was too sudden, she was hit all of a sudden. She even maintained a panicked expression on her face as she fled. There was no sign of life. Her face was as white as a sheet of paper. Her dark eyes were like an endless abyss that could swallow him up at any time. There was a bloody hole on her neck. The bullet had penetrated her neck and there was an explosive wound. The hot blood kept flowing on his body. It was sticky, warm, and smelled fishy. Yu was so scared that he could not speak. It was not that he had never seen a dead person, but he had never been so close to a corpse. He could even see from the woman's eyes how helpless, hesitant, perplexed, and uneasy she was before she died. Yu struggled for a while, but due to the difference in strength, he could not push the corpse away. He was gradually out of breath. Mommy! He was extremely anxious. He was worried that Xianxia and Wuxia would meet with mishap during this time. He did not know how long the shooting would last. He also did not know how many bullets the killer hiding in the dark had. He only knew that the crowd in the square retreated like locusts and stepped on his hand from time to time. Yu curled up into a ball and used all his strength to push the corpse away. He stood up shakily. Yu suddenly could not hear anything in the midst of such a chaotic crowd. It was as if the line of death was stretched out in his ears. Beep! Beep! He turned around and looked around again. He looked at every face that was filled with fear and uneasiness. From time to time, someone would fall and never stand up again. It was like purgatory on earth. He did not know why, but there was an inexplicable sense of guilt in his heart. She was dead. She was killed by a gunshot. Yu lowered his head to look at his hands. Clenching them tightly, he dashed into the crowd again. Mommy! Yu! Amidst the clamor, he suddenly heard a familiar voice. It was hysterical and almost cracked. It was